Why on earth do we keep going back to dysfunctional relationships over and over? I mean, we forgive our toxic partners again and again, we repeatedly accept disrespect from family members, and we constantly forgive that disloyal friend who just keeps taking advantage of us. So as a neuropsychologist, please help us understand why. Why on earth do we keep going back again and again when it hurts?
That's such a common problem, and sometimes the most successful, well-meaning, seemingly independent women do it, and they're like, why do I keep doing this? And these patterns happen because it's from our earlier programming. For so many people in these early years of your life, when you're just learning how the world works, your attachment bonds with your primary caregivers, the most important adults that are in your life on a near daily or daily basis, you soak up a lot of information during that time where you're learning about who I am in this world, what happens when I communicate what I need and what I want, how people around me respond, and then ultimately that goes into a template, these certain rules for life that you translate into your future life in terms of how you're going to have relationships, how you set goals for yourself and whether you achieve them, and ultimately if you think you deserve good things. And so you see yourself in these patterns over and over again because it was so familiar to things that you were exposed to as a child and when you were trying to cope within the confines of having to depend on all the people in your life rather than being able to really individuate and do things on your own.
Incredible. So I'd love to go through the attachment styles, but why is it important for us to understand our attachment styles in the subject that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, so attachment styles are a universal phenomenon. It's something that we all develop at the early ages of our lives. Starts at a very, very early age because obviously when we come into the world as mammalian babies, we cannot take care of ourselves. We're not ready to raise ourselves. We are dependent on the adults around us to do that for us and to keep us safe. And so these attachment bonds are created because you're trying, in essence, to understand how you can survive in this world. That's how basic it gets. It's about survival. It's essentially how you decide to approach different things in your life, how you decide to relate to people. And so many of those things get stuck because we also have selective memories as human beings where when we come up on something that we encounter that seems similar to something that we did in the past or what we encountered in the past, we then will say, oh yeah, well, that's the way it works. That confirms my pre-existing ideas about myself. But anything that might actually challenge your pre-existing beliefs, we actually make excuses for them, throw them out of the water. And so that's why these pre-existing beliefs, especially when they're negative, just get confirmed over and over again, and it all comes from your attachment bonds. So of course, everybody wants to know how attachment bonds relate to your romantic relationships. That's a huge component of it. It's a huge impact that we have in our adult lives. But what people don't realize is that attachment styles goes into the foundation of what you believe about yourself. It's all about your core self-identity, how you define yourself, what you think is most important in life, but it also goes into your relationships with other people, friendships, collegial relationships, family relationships with your family of origin, and the new families that you create as you get older, and also how you go about your goals. Do you think you deserve to achieve this goal? Can you consistently achieve this goal without self-sabotaging along the way? And ultimately, your self-worth. Attachment bonds tells us a lot about how you feel about your worth in this life. Do you actually believe that you have worth, even if you make mistakes, even if you have missteps? Or do you think, okay, you know what, I'm irreparably damaged, and really, I'm not worthy of these good things to happen. And our brains are so powerful. If we actually somehow believe that, then our feelings and our actions create that reality. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ooh, all right. So I think now, I was like, now we've got to go into the attachment. So I really want anyone watching or listening right now to get out a pen. And as you go through the attachment styles, I want people to start to write down which ones actually resonate with them, that they feel like they are. Because then after you've gone through them, I really want to then break them down, figure out how that holds us back, and then what people can do about it. Because this is so freaking powerful for us to understand in order, you know me, I'm all about how do women build their confidence and actually get the life they want and desire. And I think that your book and the attachments that we're about to go through really do allow us to lay out exactly what's happening, take those blinders off so that we can start to act and take control and our power back. So if you don't mind taking us through those attachments.
Absolutely. And before we get into it, I also want to say there are 4 attachment styles, and I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm supposed to fit neatly into each box. But actually, so much of my work with patients, I noticed that people are saying, no, I kind of am a combination style. Maybe I have shadows of this style and this other style, or maybe one style shows up more in my friendships, but another one shows up more in my romantic relationships, and that's all possible. So if you don't feel like only one style describes you, maybe it's 2 or even 3, that's totally normal too.
I love that. Before you actually go on then, would you advise, as people are now listening then, to break things up and be like a bucket for relationships, a bucket for work, a bucket for friends, and then as you go through them, they can kind of put in where they like, okay, this is amazing, I love this stuff.
Yeah, because it can totally manifest differently in different areas of your life.
Yeah.
So the 4 styles, there's 1 secure tough style, and then there's 3 insecure. And just so we know the genesis of where this comes from, it came from studies that were done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. They did these studies primarily in the 60s and 70s, but since then there's been lots of replications where they take babies and toddlers and they put them into an environment where this is a new environment for the baby. They come in with a parent, and then that parent meets a stranger who comes in. The stranger is obviously part of the research study. Then the parent leaves. They see how the baby or toddler deal with the stranger when the parent's not around. The parent comes back, they leave again, like all of these different permutations of the situation to see how they're coping with essentially a stressor. The stressor is, you left me alone with somebody I don't know. How am I going to respond to that? And also, how am I going to respond when you come back? Am I going to welcome you with open arms? Am I still mad at you, mom or dad, for doing this to me? Out of that research is how they develop these 4 attachment styles. They noticed that babies and toddlers kind of had certain consistencies in the way that they responded to the study that would put them into these buckets. And then they followed these babies throughout their life, into their teenage years, into adulthood, to see what other patterns would manifest as they got older. So that's kind of the basis for it. So the 4 styles, there was 1 secure style that emerged. And so the secure style in the room, how they responded was essentially, of course, they were distressed when the parent left. But when the parent came back, excited to see the parent, gave the parent a hug, and then kind of went about doing their activities, played with a puzzle, played with new toys, even interacted with a stranger. The 3 insecure attachment styles is where we kind of start to see that there may be some problems with the development of not only their relationships, but also their sense of self. So the first insecure type is the anxious insecure type. The anxious insecure type is someone who, in the room during the study, very, very, very hard to separate from the parent in the first place. As a parent was leaving, they're like protesting so much that it was so difficult for the parent to even get out of the room. But once they left, the child would literally not do anything, not play, not eat a snack, not interact at all with the stranger, even though the parent actually introduced the stranger to the child, like, hey, look, this is mama's friend, or this is dada's friend. They just didn't do anything. They almost were like frozen. And then when the parent came back, immediately running to the parent, like clinging to them. And then even when the parent was in the room for 5-10 minutes, like, hey, I'm not leaving now, I'm here. They didn't really explore that much. It wasn't like, okay, now you're here, now I can go back to playing like a secure attached child would. And so a lot of separation anxiety. And then as an adult, how does this manifest? This manifests in wanting a lot of approval and reinforcement from the people in their life, especially people who they're in big relationships with, romantic partners, best friends, etc. Oftentimes putting other people's needs before their own because they're constantly afraid of abandonment and rejection. And so it's like, okay, well, how can I keep this person close to me? Well, maybe I should just do everything they want, not express my own needs. And so they're more prone to codependency and putting other people's problems ahead of their own. But obviously that leads to exhaustion and burnout and ultimately resentment. Like, I never get what I want. But they're just so scared of losing whatever little support they perceive that they just don't want to let go of this particular pattern that they've been operating in. And then ultimately, I think it goes back to a belief system where you think other people are more important than you. You think other people are more worthy than you. And so that's why you put so much of a premium on other people's opinions of you, on whether or not they approve of your decisions, on whether or not they're okay with what you did, even though inside, if you ask your intuition, you know that that was the right thing to do, but it doesn't feel right until somebody says, you're okay there. You did the right thing.
So that must mean then that our self-care goes to the bottom of our priority list.
100% for anxiously attached people.
which then I assume will have an effect on our health. And I've heard you talk about in your book about how it really does lead to chronic illness and disease.
Absolutely. Feelings, thoughts, and behaviors are all interlinked. And so if you start behaving in a way where everybody else is more important than you, ultimately your thoughts catch up with that. Your thoughts start to say, oh yeah, I guess I'm not important after all. So that's why self-care goes completely down the drain, because it's about others' care and not about self-care ever, right? These people end up acting like martyrs. But like you said, there are chronic effects on your mental and physical health. This leads people with anxious attachment to be more at risk for anxiety and for depression. They can have a number of chronic physical effects where they actually end up manifesting a lot of their emotional symptoms in their body, right? So they're not taking care of themselves. They're not exercising. They're not eating well. They're starting to develop a higher risk for chronic heart disease and other heart conditions. And also it even leads to sometimes that feeling of disconnection to a higher rate of mortality at an earlier age. So there's some really big effects that, again, because it's so gradual, you almost like don't see them happening, but it's directly linked to how you live on a day-to-day basis.
Oh my God. So anyone insecure out there, don't feel bad. We're gonna help you. But it's insane to think about a personality thing, right? Where you're insecure then leads to potentially you dying sooner.
Right. Like, isn't that, I know, it's insane, right? Like, but it's true. And so much of it has to do with this idea of others' preservation over self-preservation for the anxiously attached. Everybody else's survival and thriving is more important than me, right? And then it ultimately manifests itself that way.
And so that then leads back to the original question, where that's why they may be with somebody that isn't right for them. That's why they may forgive a friend who backstabs them, because they're so insecure and they want to be loved that they're willing to forgive people even if they do them wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think what you're talking about too is this loosening of boundaries over time, right? You start to lose your own internal compass of what actually feels right and where your boundaries should be. Like, hey, this is not okay that you treated me this way. I don't want to put up with it. But it's kind of like this foot in the door phenomenon that we talk about in social psychology, where it's like, okay, like when you're working with a telemarketer, somebody who's trying to sell you something, maybe they don't sell you the big item first. They sell you something that's only going to be $1. And then they sell you something that's $5, then $10, and finally it's $100. And it's kind of like that, right? Where, okay, the first time somebody pushes on that boundary a little bit, you say, well, you know what? It's okay. I really love them. I'll let them do it to me this one time. And then they ask even more of you the next time. You're like, well, but last time I already did this other thing for them. So this isn't really that far of a cry from this last thing, right? So over time, gradually, they just wear down all your defenses and your boundaries to the point where then you don't even have that division of where do I begin and end and where does somebody else begin and end. It's like all together, all mixed in. And a lot of people with anxious attachment will tell me in my practice, like, yeah, whenever my husband gets angry, I'm angry too. Like, I just adopt their feelings to the point where I don't even know what my own feelings are anymore, because I just basically take on all the problems of everybody else in my life. And then if my husband's not happy, I'm freaked out all day because I feel like I'm not happy until he's happy, right? But it's so much predicated on making somebody else's life better, but not their own. And there is a piece of this, which is sometimes what we call in the psychology world, a trauma reenactment, where you're essentially replaying the same stressful experience over and over, but with the different people that seem different, but they're kind of the same archetype. It's the same people. So like anxiously attached people are actually quite drawn oftentimes to an avoidantly attached person, which we're going to talk about next, where they're constantly trying to go after them for that emotional connection and that reinforcement. But avoidantly attached people, their blind spot is, oh, when you get too deep and too heavy with me emotionally, I'm going to go away. So then they just keep charging each other up, and you just keep doing the same thing over and over again with different people, but it's really the same person in terms of how they respond and how they deal with emotional connection and stress. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about then the next one.
Yeah, so avoidantly attached people, I feel like this is the group that are going to be most likely to say I'm securely attached when they're not, because one of their coping strategies is avoidance. It's avoiding problems in their life that would be too stressful for them. So these kids, when they were in the lab, when they were in the laboratory environment, when their parent left, they acted like they didn't care. It was almost like no big deal. They would just kind of do their own thing, whatever, kind of play absentmindedly with stuff, didn't engage a stranger either. When the parent came back, they're like, oh, hey, maybe acknowledge them, but then just not a hug, not really like excitement, just kind of doing their thing. So at first, the researchers thought, oh, well, like maybe they just don't care about their parent, or maybe what's going on with that bond? They're just not close, or what's going on? Well, later on, they had these follow-up studies where they measured the heart rates of these infants and toddlers, and it was a cover. Wow. Even though outside they looked like they were emotionless, their hearts were beating so fast when their parent left the room, like they were very stressed out. But their coping is like, let's pretend it's not happening. So as an adult, some of that carries over where stressful emotional experiences, I'm just not going to talk about them. I'm not going to acknowledge it's happening. And it's probably because as a child, they learned that when they express their emotions, they were put down, or the parents seemed overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I cannot deal with that right now. Please do not tell me that you're angry or sad because mama's got her own stuff going on, right? And again, this is not to blame parents. We all have stuff going on. But sometimes inadvertently we create insecure attachment in our children because they see this and they're learning this message of, oh, let's not talk about emotion. A lot of times avoidantly attached people as kids, they were the star child, or they were asked to be a parent earlier than they were supposed to. And I mean a parentified child, not like an actual parent, like maybe in teen years. I'm talking about, these kids who are given huge responsibilities at an early age through a variety of different reasons. Maybe the parent just needed so much help and was like, you take care of your sibling. I don't have time. Or sometimes the parent has a huge chronic illness and they just had to step up. There was nobody else. But either way, they start to get this reinforcement in their minds of, oh, I'm only as good as my last achievement. People love and value me for what I do and what I achieve. And when I'm being my best and getting after it and being this perfectionist, everybody adores me. But the minute that I say, I have some anxiety, I don't believe that people will show up for me. So why bother even saying it?
So they just avoid it altogether.
Avoid it, and they really get uncomfortable when other people are expressing their emotions very freely. What I hear most from my patients with avoidant attachment is, oh my gosh, that person is so much drama. They're always talking about their feelings. And then, we really objectively look at it. We're like, they're not dramatic. They're just open with their feelings, but it overwhelms a person with avoidant attachment. And again, goes back to their childhood of when they were overwhelming their parents whenever they said something that they were feeling. And so they've adopted that now into their own worldview. And when they are stressed, they just go into themselves. They avoid everybody around them. They just escape. It's like, see ya.
That's me.
Yeah.
I'm literally putting my hand up. I'm like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's interesting then is you actually started this by saying they actually sometimes cover up by saying they're secure. So as an adult, if it's, let's say, your partner, how do you know if they're an avoidant or actually secure? What would be the differences? Because if someone's saying, no, I'm totally secure, what do you mean? Yeah. But they're avoiding it, I assume then that connection can't actually be completed if they're avoiding the truth of where they are.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a good question. And I think that so many people, like we talked about, it's a spectrum. So maybe for people who have some shades of avoidant attachment, 80% of the time, they're actually acting as a secure partner. It's when things get really stressful or when they're in a new phase of their life that they've never dealt with before, when they're already emotionally and cognitively taxed, where some of the shadows start slipping back in. It's like maybe those old habits, like, okay, you know what? I probably should talk to my partner about this and just admit that I'm having a hard time. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do another project because that really makes me feel good about myself and it's something that I can control. So the questions that you have to ask yourself is, are you able to still do the things that are important to you, but stay connected to the people around you that matter to you? Not everyone, right? But do you have that one or two people where if you're stressed, you're willing to say, yeah, you know what? I will admit I'm stressed and I need a little help. And does your self-esteem go away in a big way when maybe you have a mistake at work or maybe something doesn't work out in terms of your career? Because that's another piece of the avoidantly attached where they will just be so hard on themselves. And it's like all of a sudden their self-esteem is in the complete pits, as opposed to, well, obviously that's disappointing. I wish that didn't happen. But overall, I still feel okay about myself, even though I didn't get as much done today in my job, or I didn't get that promotion I was really gunning for. Does your self-esteem stay intact? And I think the last thing is, do you feel ultimately good about the way that you're approaching your life, that you're living your life according to your top values? Because a lot of times avoidantly attached people, they'll just keep setting goals for themselves without even really checking in and saying, is this really that important to me? Or am I just doing it because I know that when I achieve a goal, it makes me feel good? But is there real purpose and meaning behind my actions? That's another thing to ask.
Wow, I love how you broke that down in all the different areas of how it can impact relationships, family, and obviously business and work, because that's super important to know where you are with things. And I'd love to know, you said also about anxious and avoidant, how they're kind of attracted to each other. Why is that? Because in hearing you explain it, it would seem like an avoidant would want someone else that is an avoidant because now there's no conflict because, when something's wrong, you run. When something's wrong, I run, and now we get each other.
Yeah, and here's the key. The avoidantly attached person does want connection. They're just pretending that they don't because of that earlier, right? So it's like they actually want somebody who's a little bit more like the anxiously attached, who's gonna like dole out the love and the support and the reassurance. They want that. They secretly do want that and they feel good on that, but they're afraid to let their guard down with that person because, what if they leave? And then I'm just gonna be left thinking my own pre-existing thoughts again about how people just can't tolerate it when I actually express my emotions or show the true part of who I am. And so the avoidantly attached person actually, in the beginning especially, loves an anxious attached style because they're giving them so much attention. And they're like, yeah, I want this attention. I didn't really get this the same way when I was a child, probably. But then the anxiously attached person asks more of them, always wanting to talk about emotions. They need that pull. They need that reassurance. And that's when the anxiously attached person is saying, okay, well, this is too much for me to handle. That's too much. I need to go away for a little bit. I need to take a break from this relationship. I'm going to go on a business trip and stay an extra 2 days, but not tell my partner I'm actually staying an extra 2 days. I'm going to tell them that the conference is till Sunday, even though the conference ends on Friday. I mean, these are real stories from some of my patients who are like, this is what I've done to create space because I need that to self-regulate. And then meanwhile, the anxiously attached person, they chase after the avoidantly attached because from their childhood, they may have had a primary caregiver or a parent who made it seem like you have to do things to make it worth my while to care about you. And so then that gets lodged in their subconscious and they're chasing after people who it seems like it would be like a huge get to get their attention. And so they don't want the easy person who says, hey, yeah, like, guess what? I'm gonna dole out my love freely. They feel like they have to work for it. They learned this lesson earlier on that if I'm not working for it and I'm not earning it, then it doesn't matter. So then they go after these avoidantly attached types who are making it harder for you to really know your footing about how they feel about you.
When it comes to your health, knowledge is damn power. And my favorite health tool in my Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul tool belt for tracking my metabolism is Lumen. Your metabolism is at the center of everything that your body does. And so there are so many benefits that come with optimal metabolic health, like actually feeling rested and energized when you wake up in the morning, better able to manage that weight that really is bringing you down, and so much more. So guys, if you want to take that next step in improving your health, then go to lumen.me and use coupon code NYBBS to get $50 off your Lumen. That is LUMEN.me and use the coupon code NYBBS, which is Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul, to get $50 off your Lumen. Thank you guys over at Lumen for sponsoring this episode. I find this stuff fascinating. The way you just broke it down makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. Wow, I love that.
And it's so crazy that everyone's just doing that like over and over with each other.
And you don't realize it, right?
No, you don't.
Kind of just like, I'm absolutely guilty of this, where I just like, oh, that person's mean, that person's cruel, that person's, disrespectful. But actually, in understanding, well, maybe it's just their attachment type that is leading them to behave in a way that actually is the opposite of my attachment type. So I'm perceiving it actually in a different lens than they are.
Exactly. Yeah, we all want the same thing underneath, which is what's really interesting, is that we actually all want connection. I don't care if you say, I'm the proverbial lone wolf, I'm a recluse, I don't need that. I would believe you, except for the fact that we have biology, evolution, and science saying that's not true, because we are social beings. Like literally, if we didn't have social connection, we all would die and we would not exist as a species anymore. It's just the way that we're built. And so it's true that people connect in different ways. And some people are like, I want to have my 500 friends. And some people are like, I just need 2 friends. But nevertheless, you all need meaningful connection to survive and thrive in this life. And so even people who are avoidantly attached, they need that connection. That's what they're actually driving for underneath, but they're just too afraid to trust. And they've been disappointed for so long that they're just going to say, you know what, on an outward basis, I'm not going to talk about it. And I'm just going to let everybody think that I'm strong and I never have any problems. And the funny thing about this avoidant attached style is that a lot of the things that they do seem admirable to a lot of people. So there's also not oftentimes a lot of motivation to change, because people are like, hey, you're not connecting so much with your family, or like, you haven't called your best friend in days. And they're like, yeah, but I'm going after a huge thing in my career right now. And there's always a good excuse for why they're not connecting. And people are giving them compliments like, how do you do it every day? Like, that's amazing how much you get done. So you almost get a big ego boost from being the way you are, but ultimately there might be some unhealthy aspects to it.
I really feel like you're describing me right now, in the sense of like, even as I was reading your book, I was really processing, because I'm all about learning. I want to get better. I want to grow till the day that I freaking die. Yeah. So what are the things that I'm missing in my life that I can understand myself more in order to adapt and change to achieve the goals and be the person I really want to be? That's always my North Star. And so as you were talking and as I was reading your book, I really realized that growing up, my very strong Greek father, anytime something would happen, if like my friend would die, he had so much compassion. Like he's a man of just a big heart. But he learned lessons of how to handle adversity growing up in a tiny village in the mountains of Cyprus. Yeah. So he taught me when something went wrong, it's just life. Right. And so anytime something as a young girl would knock me to my knees and I would be in tears, it would be like, it's just life. Right. Just life, brush it off, just life.
Get over and get back up.
And it wasn't that he meant to, but in reading your book and understanding, it was my emotions were a bother. The things that I were going through weren't, really greeted, if in all honesty. And so I think that for me, I became that, well, just be strong, Lisa. You just got to overcome it, Lisa. And so as you were describing it, and that's why I really want to get into, once we've gone through them, was like what we can do about it. Like how this holds us back, because that's very important. So in fact, if you don't mind, how does this hold us back in having a really healthy relationship, or in having success at work, or accepting friends that actually deserve you instead of you chasing a friend that may not be right for you or nice to you?
Oh, definitely. And thank you so much for sharing about your personal experience, because I really resonate with that on different levels. I think that because of my own self-development work and really having insight, I probably most of the time operate as a securely attached person. But when I'm stressed, I have to make sure that I don't slip into my avoidant shadows. And I had a family, I had parents who, again, this is partially traditional Chinese culture, also part of it, my parents' personalities, where it's like, don't talk about your negative emotions. Like, you know how many other people have so much more misfortune? Like, let's just get out of the situation ASAP. Like, don't cry about it. I mean, that's kind of like the lessons that they imparted on me. And so I definitely feel like over time, I was just like, oh, well, nobody wants to hear about my emotions. Like, why even talk about them? Just do what needs to be done and just move on. But then you close up a part of yourself that is important for your full-scale holistic development. And I had to learn as an adult how to have better emotional vocabulary, how to talk more about emotions, not to get overwhelmed when other people are getting distressed with their emotions. And so in terms of how do we then have the better relationships, not chasing after people who aren't going to be good for us. So much of it is that you have to establish a secure attachment with yourself first. So many of the times when we operate in these insecure attachment styles, what's really missing is like really feeling secure within yourself and really trusting your intuition. We haven't talked about disorganized attachment yet, which I think is such an important one to discuss, because disorganized attachment has the most misconceptions about it in the literature. So in the first studies, they pretty much kind of just put everybody that didn't fit the other three forms into this bucket. But I think over time, during my studies and my research and my clinical work with patients, I noticed that this type has a very hallmark piece of how they interact with people, and that is that they constantly act like they're in fight or flight. And that's why it seems disorganized, because their coping doesn't have just one pattern. Like we talked about anxious being more like people pleasers, and then the avoidant being more these like high achievers, perfectionists. Well, the disorganized attached doesn't have just one hallmark way that they cope with adversity in life. It's like they're always in fight or flight. So it's that feeling of constantly being amped up, looking around you to make sure that you can still be safe, questioning people, even when they're safe people, healing people, like, what are your real intentions towards me? They tend to have the worst time with emotion regulation. Just kind of feels like their nervous system's always dysregulated. They generally did have childhoods where they were exposed to a lot of chaos, either through trauma or just through their parents having their own difficulties. And so as an adult, they inadvertently are attracted to the chaos and create that chaos for themselves. And I've had patients literally tell me, this relationship is too calm. Like something terrible is about to happen. And then they'll just sabotage the relationship, just break up with the person. Or they'll say, well, I don't really know if this person's really gonna stick around. So let me see what's gonna happen if I actually put them to a test. Like I'm gonna ask all these crazy things of them and see if they still do it. Of course, not all the time do they have this awareness. They're just like doing it. But the ones who have actually done the work with me will say like, yeah, I know that that was a test. And essentially, eventually they do push people away, right? Because it becomes too much. And the people who are there in these loving relationships where they're just like, you know what, I don't know what to do anymore. Like every day I show you how much I love you, but you're still testing me. You know, maybe you're even cheating on me just to see if I'll stick around, like just to prove your point. Like, I can't do it anymore. I need to move on. And then of course, once that happens, the person with disorganized attachment will use that to confirm their pre-existing ideas. Like, oh yeah, see, no one's safe. See, they left. It's like, yeah, but you have to take some responsibility for what you created. That was a pattern that you created. And sometimes it takes time to realize that.
So again, going back to it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that they were testing to see, and then you just do it enough, you get the result that you're expecting.
Yeah, exactly. And then your selective memory remembers the moment they left, but doesn't remember how you tested them or how they hung in there for 2 years with you, even though you were setting up all these tests to see if they would stick around. Your selective memory will just say, yeah, but you know what? Who cares? They ultimately left. And that confirms everything I have to know about myself.
So I get how that then transpires in a relationship specifically. How would that look, let's say, with friends? So like if it's like you're in a bunch of girlfriends and you have the fight or flight attachment style.
Yeah, I think it's just always like questioning whether or not they're really safe people, always feeling like you're in competition with everybody else in the group. Like, oh, well, I have to be the person to get the most nurturance or get the most attention, and then doing things that might feel like attention getting to other people. But ultimately, you're just trying to confirm, are these my real friends? Are they really going to be there for me when push comes to shove, you know? And sometimes even manufacturing problems so that your friends will come to your aid so that you can feel like they're there. So even when there is no drama, like creating drama to see if like, who's going to come to me? And so sometimes people with disorganized attachment, they will have more, I would say, problematic coping strategies like falling into alcohol and substances, because I've also worked with a lot of patients who literally they have achieved sobriety for a decade. And then they get into a new relationship and it feels just too real. Like the person's saying, you're the person for me, I want to marry you. And the next day they're drinking.
Really?
Right. It's like too much. I can't handle it. My subconscious is saying like, this doesn't compute with me. Like I don't think I actually ultimately deserve this good thing to happen. So then like the next day, sadly, they're off the wagon. And of course you can always get back on, but then the ripple effect that creates, you know, the way that they end up feeling about themselves as a result, like, oh my gosh, I'm so damaged. I'm never going to be able to achieve sobriety again. Like just the horrible negative messages they tell themselves when they make a mistake. I mean, that's really kind of hallmark of this particular type.
And so how would that showcase in your career?
I think because they're constantly thinking about fight or flight, they just can't actualize. Like they'll set a big goal for themselves, but they just can't stay consistent with it. Because if your mind is always on survival, how can you think about being the best version of yourself in a career? You just can't. So it's always kind of just swimming. You're just like staying above water as opposed to being able to really jump through hoops and like do the things that you really want to do in life. And so I've noticed that for a lot of my patients with disorganized attachment, when they make vision boards, it's very hard for them because they can't really visualize how those things can happen for them. Like it's a nice exercise, but they don't align with it. They don't feel like even if I put my effort forward, I can achieve this because they don't have a lot of evidence in their life that that's happened in the past in a consistent way. And so being in survival all the time means that you're not really working on thriving.
And so who are they mostly attached to?
I think disorganized individuals can also be attracted to other individuals who are disorganized because of the fact that everything just feels chaotic all the time in the relationship. And then inadvertently, they're creating that trauma that they experienced when they were children of always being in a chaotic relationship, never feeling like you can rest and relax into anything. And so oftentimes they do become attracted to one another for that reason. I also have found that there are a lot of individuals who have disorganized attachment that will come across people who are securely attached. And a couple of things happen. The securely attached person sometimes tries to rescue the disorganized person, like, hey, like, I want to show you that there is a path forward. doesn't really work out because, again, of that self-sabotage. But then the other thing that happens is I have seen people who are securely attached get into a really big relationship with somebody who's disorganized attached. And then all of a sudden, for the first time in their adult life, they're developing some forms of insecure attachment themselves because it was so chaotic in that relationship. Now they're questioning, well, can I have a good, healthy relationship? Like, this person who I really love did all this stuff to me that I wasn't really happy about. And now I'm questioning whether or not I deserve a healthy relationship. So I've seen people's secure attachment been shaken because of the chaotic nature of the disorganized interaction. But I think one of the misperceptions out there is, okay, if you have disorganized attachment, you can't heal from it because it's too late for you, or this is too crazy to deal with. And I really hope that people are not walking away with that message. A lot of people who have disorganized attachment did experience some kind of trauma in their life, or had a very significant long period of time where they were under a lot of stress. And so be compassionate with the people who have disorganized attachment in your life. Be compassionate with yourself if you feel like that describes you, because you were just doing the best with what you had. As a child, you're trying to piece all this together. It's very overwhelming for your nervous system, especially one that's just developing. And so really being able to learn these techniques that can help is going to change your life. But for people with disorganized attachment, it might take just a little bit more time before that healing can truly begin. And that's really the main difference.
Interesting. I find all of this so fascinating because a lot of the time I do take things personally, right? And I think a lot of people do. It's like, oh, well, they did this. But understanding that you have a type that you're bringing to the table, and then how you're interacting with other people with different types, can be somewhat tricky to navigate because, like we already said, like 70-75% of people have one of the insecure attachment types. And so how do we start to navigate everything that you've just said, right? That's so freaking fascinating. Now, what do we do about it? How do we use knowing our attachment types to actually deliver on having a beautiful relationship, going after those goals, having the dream career that we've always wanted? Like, how do we actually use this now practically in our lives to get the things that we actually want in life?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And obviously, as you're learning about these attachment styles, it can be kind of overwhelming at first, like, oh my gosh, like this was happening and it's holding me back from my best life. That really sucks. Of course, that acknowledgement is important for the next step. But I think it's also important to realize that the piece that is the most foundational to attachment is that it goes into your self-talk. It goes into the way that you think about yourself. It's like your brain's operating system. It's like just the way that it's base level operating. And so to be able to change that, you have to change your operating system. You have to update it. You have to refine it. You have to make it work in a way that is going to serve all of the goals that you have in different areas of your life. And the way through that is reparenting. Reparenting is something that people have thrown around before, and I think that there hasn't been a good definition of it, but a really good, solid definition of reparenting is simply just showing up as your adult self for the parts of you that are neglected, that haven't been nurtured, that has unmet wants and needs from childhood or earlier experiences. And all of us have that metaphorical little you that's still living inside us. And it's carrying those memories and burdens from the past. And if you're not listening to them, then they're going to express themselves in unhealthy ways in your relationship. So rather than looking for a healing relationship first and foremost, which of course is important for us, it's really most important ultimately to start with a relationship to yourself, that self-compassion, that self-love that we can all offer ourselves. But I think oftentimes it just gets neglected, or you're just thinking about like, what's the fix out here? But the fix is in here, the fix is in here. And the reparenting works because your adult self has the capabilities, has more resources than your child self to actually meet the needs that you didn't get met when you were little. So reparenting is really a set of different tools and ideas and activities that you can undertake that essentially puts you at that balance of having a more secure operating style. So a person who is secure, their self-talk sounds very different from the self-talk of insecure attachment types. Their self-talk more sounds like, well, I like and believe in myself. You know, I can affect positive outcomes in my life. I can handle what comes my way, even if it's challenging. And I can be independent and rely on other people too. And so being able to follow that sort of thread of thinking and seeing how that radiates out into your life, that's the biggest goal. And reparenting starts with a series of behaviors. But because behaviors and thoughts and feelings are all connected, through your behaviors, you can transform how you think and how you feel. And then that ends up going on a positive cycle as opposed to the negative cycle that oftentimes people see themselves in when they have insecure attachment.
Okay. I'm so with you here. So we're going to adopt and work towards a secure attachment. And then once we're able, hopefully, to then find somebody who's also secure, that's when the beautiful combination of a healthy relationship can really blossom.
Exactly. And I would also say that, of course, the best thing is if you have a secure person with another secure person. But even if you do the work as a securely attached person, the person who might still be dealing with some shadows of their insecure attachment style, it's still possible to have a healthy relationship with them as long as they're acknowledging how their style is contributing to some of the difficulties you're having in your relationship. And it's not about blaming them, right? Or being like, haha, like I did more self-development than you, I have more insight than you. But it's more about, can they recognize that some of their patterns are just not working for this relationship? And the secure attached person, because they do tend to have better boundaries that are healthy, by setting those boundaries, their partner is almost learning from that. Like, okay, you know, boundaries are what makes us feel safe, both as adults and when we were children. Like, we need to know that there's some structure and some way of operating that makes sense in our lives. And so when you are in a relationship with a secure person and they're saying, nope, like, this is a line for me, like, please don't cross it, it actually helps a relationship to be healthy over time too, because a person is learning, okay, this is a line I can't cross if I want to be in a relationship with this person. And so it's not that you're responsible, if you're the secure person, to like help them get to a secure place, but your relationship can still be healthy if you hold on to those self-statements and stay in your secure operating system.
This is all freaking amazing. I love this. Now, how do we start to change? And you tell a story about the 62-year-old, the woman who, like, the first time she comes in, she starts yelling at you, and by the end, she's like this most amazing woman. Talk me through that woman, because I want to make sure that people hearing now, we've covered exactly what it is, why it matters. And now you keep saying, like, which I love, like, over and over, like, it isn't a permanent state. It is something you can evolve, you can change. And your story, the fact that she's 62 as well is so amazing, because I think as we get older, we think that we're more, well, I can't change, I'm too old. So if you don't mind breaking down her story and then how you took her through the evolution so that people at home can see and hear what they may need to do in order to change their attachment style.
Yeah, definitely. I have a very vivid image in my mind of this client that you're referring to. So when she first came to my practice, she was essentially almost ordered to come by her adult children because their relationships were just spiraling, and she was also having such a hard time controlling her long-term drinking issue. Like, she would have these brief periods of being able to stay sober and then just completely falling off the wagon again. And there was so much conflict in her daily life with her husband, with her adult children, to the point where a couple of her adult children are saying, you can't even see the grandkids. Like, we just don't know what version of grandma's showing up, and it's too stressful for our children. So a lot of things in her life were falling apart. And so when she first came to me, understandably, was pretty angry, but the level of wrath when you don't even know a person and how much they can be so mad at you, not even one word out of my mouth and already yelling and screaming, was just really tough. Was testing all the other staff that were working with her. She was part of a residential treatment facility for the very first part of her treatment. And just, I mean, it was just like leaving a trail of mess in her wake of just, you know, yelling at the staff. Why don't you have my favorite cereal? I told you about it yesterday. I mean, just flying off the handle. And just over time, I think it was about building trust and helping her understand, okay, this trauma happened to you earlier in life, which she was only starting to process in her later years. So she had submerged something terrible that had happened to her in her childhood down so far that she wasn't even processing or acknowledging it. But then in her 50s, she started having flashbacks about the trauma that happened. And that was what led to a spiraling of a lot of different behaviors that ultimately led her to the place that she was at when she first came to see me. And it was really over time where you sort of started to let her know that it's terrible that happened to you in the past, but you don't always have to be a victim. You don't always have to feel powerless about being able to change. And you can literally change at any age, but you have to start accepting yourself, because this trauma made her feel like she was deficient, like there was something wrong with her, like she wasn't worthy of good outcomes, because that's why all that bad stuff happened to her. It must be me. And that's what children think sometimes when they're little. It's like, their worldview is so narrow. So it's like, well, if my parents got divorced, it must be me. Or, if I got physically abused by somebody, it must be me. Something I did caused this. And so this whole full idea that she had of, I'm deficient, something's wrong with me, I'm never gonna get better. We really had to start to undo that part of her programming and say, let's start with some self-acceptance, and self-compassion, because she was lashing out at everybody ultimately because she was angry at herself. And so really being able to understand that process of what you're putting out there is actually how you feel about yourself, as opposed to your anger is really towards them. It's really towards you. You have anger toward yourself. So let's start resolving that. And piece by piece, building that trust with herself, that she is ultimately in charge and in the driver's seat of the kind of life she wants to have. And like 3 months later even, just like the most loving person emerged. She was just this loving, caring person, remembered everything about every staff member's families and what they were interested in, like would ask them these questions. Over time, her relationships with her kids repaired. Her relationship with her husband got a lot better. She had the confidence to know that she could stop drinking and stopped. Was able to continue that, started being a public speaker in certain types of forums for other patients who were suffering from similar things, and like being able to say, hey, look, like I'm still in progress, but look at what I'm doing today versus what I was doing last year. It was really, really inspiring to see her change. And I recently had a chance to revisit with her again, and she's still doing well. And I think that there's just a lot of realism too in the way that she sees things, like, oh, am I still yelling at my husband sometimes out of nowhere? Yeah, that happens. But I do know why I do it now, and I know how to repair it when those mistakes still inadvertently happen sometimes. And so I think the more that she was getting these positive outcomes in her life, the more she really believed in herself and her ability to change for the better, no matter how old she was and how long she's been dealing with the trauma.
If you're struggling to find the energy just to do the things that you love, or you feel like that fogginess in the brain just won't lift, a lot of these symptoms actually stem from a minerals deficiency that is super common and also totally solvable, which is why I'm absolutely obsessed and love and take Beam Mineral Liquid supplements every single day. And I just absolutely love how simple it is, guys, because you don't need a kitchen full of mineral supplements. You just need one small serving per day, and that is it. So guys, I really truly recommend that you give Beam Minerals a try right now. Head over to beamminerals.com and enter code NYBBS for Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul at checkout for 20% off your first order. That's beamminerals.com and enter code NYBBS. Nurture Your Bad Bitch Soul at checkout for 20% off your first order. I'd love to go over what were those key things in that story that really allowed her to do those incremental things in order to go from the person that's screaming and yelling to, oh my God, I remember how's, Johnny doing? Like, your little son. So what are those key things? It seems like acknowledging your past.
Yes, acknowledging your past. Knowing that what happened to you ultimately was not your fault, and it happened to you at a time when you didn't have control over your environment and couldn't really cope in the way that maybe your adult self could, right? So acknowledging it, but not wearing it like, with printed letters on your back. Like, this is not who you have to be. You don't just have to be a PTSD victim, right? Sometimes people say that and it actually empowers them to say I was a victim, but a lot of times I find that when you use that word, it makes them feel powerless. So it's like, okay, if you're using that word and that is actually holding you back from being able to have more agency, then let's find a different way to still validate and acknowledge that experience, but not make it feel like you don't have any agency to move forward in a positive way. So really acknowledging her trauma, saying it was horrible that this happened. It's terrible that this happened. But what can you do now to move forward? Because you do have a lot more self-initiative and responsibility and ability than you did when you were 5 and when this was happening, right? I think that was a big piece. Another piece was really knowing that chaos isn't the way that your life has to be. Because again, she had a lot of chaos in her early childhood. Not only this big index trauma, but also she was the child of two alcoholic parents. So it was kind of a coping that she learned, and part of why she became addicted to alcohol at a later age too. But also there was just so much chaos in her daily environment because the parents were constantly fighting. When they were drinking, they would say things they didn't mean. There was domestic violence in the family, right? And so just understanding that chaotic environment that you grew up with does not have to be your mainstay now. And just because things are calm doesn't mean you have to incite chaos, doesn't mean that something bad is going to happen. Maybe this is just the way it's supposed to be. So we did a lot of nervous system regulation strategies with her, like help her to get to the other side of fight or flight, which is rest and relaxation. And then whenever she was in that state, she would inadvertently start to have a panic attack because it just felt so unfamiliar to her to have calm and peace. And it's like, no, like that's your body saying, wait, like something's wrong. I'm not supposed to feel this relaxed, but yeah, you deserve it. You deserve to feel relaxed. And so we kind of kept bringing her back every time she would have a panic attack of like, nope, everything is fine. You don't need to get into fight or flight. Our brains and our bodies are not meant to be in fight or flight chronically. They're meant to only do it in spurts of time. And then once we escape that big issue, we're supposed to be able to get to rest again. And so really just even re-educating her about why she was inadvertently attracted to chaos as a norm in her life and how to get to a different new norm, which is like, oh, no. The way it's supposed to work is 90% of the time you're supposed to be in calm and relaxation, 10% of the time you're supposed to be in chaos and stress. Not the other way around. And so it's kind of undoing her programming slowly through nervous system regulation techniques.
Well, literally, you took the words from my mouth and like, it seems like you think that that's normal. You grew up with parents that were alcoholics screaming at each other. So the fact that you become an alcoholic and you're screaming seems like you're normal.
That's right.
So recognizing that it's not normal so that you can make the change seems like a big thing for someone listening right now. And I think for myself as well, there was a bit of like shame over admitting certain things or talking about certain things, because I think then you think like, well, I don't want to speak up. So you carry the shame, you don't speak up. Like this woman, maybe she had shame around the fact that she had two alcoholic parents. But if you don't acknowledge it, then you're unable to then really make that change. You go, okay, I have the shame, now I can speak up. In speaking up, someone's telling me this isn't normal. Now understanding this may not be normal, how do I change?
Exactly. And I think that you're absolutely right about it inciting almost sometimes shame in terms of actually talking about what's really going on and not necessarily knowing what normal is supposed to be, but then also from a distance, I think she was watching other people whose lives just seemed like so much more congruent and happy and like, well, but that's not, that I don't deserve that. There was something that she was in her programming telling herself, yeah, maybe that works for other people, but it's not what I deserve. And it's also not what I know. And the weird thing about your brain is once it's conditioned to something, even if it's unhealthy, overall your brain is more attracted to it because at least you know you've survived it because you're still here, right? So like for the traumas and the chaos that you've been through, even if that was terrible, it felt terrible, but you're alive. So then some part of your brain is saying, well, but I know how to deal with that kind of problem. But I don't know how to deal with this new problem where it's like, everything's fine. What am I supposed to do then? Like, I've never coped with that before, so I don't know how I'm gonna survive that. Weird how our brain plays those tricks on us, but our brains tend to trend toward the familiar because at least it's been tested, even if it's not great, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the shame also, I think, prevents you from being honest about how you're really showing up, because you don't want to feel bad about yourself. So you don't want to admit that maybe you were the person that screamed at that one person when they walked into your office, right? And it's like, but in order for you to change, you need to acknowledge it, not feel bad about it, not carry the shame, which you keep repeating, which I love, but you gotta know thyself. And that's like, I am all about when I start getting heated, why? When I get sad, why? When I get low energy, why? Understanding the why and owning it then allows me to make the change. But before I had almost the confidence to say it, and I think the confidence came from me realizing speaking up led to me changing, and that change gave me the confidence to then keep going. Without that confidence to speak up, I wasn't able to make the change. And so I just want to urge people that what you're saying with acknowledging the past, not feeling the shame around it, also acknowledging how you show up today, how your behavior shows up today, so that you can address it. And I bet you that woman at the time, she's walking into your office screaming at people, she wouldn't have said that she was screaming at people or being dismissive or disrespectful.
Nope, because there's always a purpose and you're trying to protect yourself. And so after the fact, I remember as she was starting to develop more insight, she's like so apologetic. And I'm like, you don't need to apologize, actually. I totally understand where you were coming from, but I think she felt really guilty. And I said, well, guilt is sometimes okay, because guilt is more like, okay, how can I do something different? But if it turns into shame, that's when that's really hurtful for us, because shame is not about, oh, I did this thing that I wish I didn't do. How can I correct it? How can I be better? Shame is about something's wrong with me just underneath, like something is wrong with me as a person as opposed to an action I did. And so we always talk about that difference of shame and guilt, and is there productive guilt? But shame is not super productive emotion, because it just makes us feel bad about ourselves. And I was like, don't feel bad about what you did. You were just coming in, because you needed to find a way to assert yourself and to make sure that people didn't trespass you in a way that you weren't okay with. So that's a trauma response. That's you being in fight or flight. Don't apologize for it. And I'm okay. Like, you yelled at me. That's okay. Like, I went home and I watched Cupcake Wars. I'm fine now.
That's your coping mechanism.
That's my coping mechanism.
Okay, so as someone's trying to change, if they hear everything we've been talking about and attachment styles and they're really trying to change, one of the things I think that can really hold a lot of us back is when we get triggered, right? Yes. So you're in the process, you're on the path, and then someone freaking triggers you, and that just derails your growth, and then all the work that you've done, you now take the shame and guilt again. And so you actually have a formula of how you handle your triggers called TIP. If you don't mind breaking down TIP, so that as a tactic, because again, I'm so all about tactics. Don't feel bad if you get triggered, but what are you going to do about it when you do? So if you don't mind taking us, I think it's such a great technique.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning triggers, because we all have them. We all have baggage as we get older, and there's just certain things that just make our blood boil, or we just overreact, and that's when you know it's a trigger, and we all have them. Usually triggers happen because it reminds you of a negative experience you had in your life that you're trying to do over, that you're trying to find a way out of. And so that's why the reaction is so big, because ultimately it's kind of like your inner core of who you are, and your integrity is somehow being violated by something that just happened. So how do we find out about some of our triggers? Well, first of all, when you have insecure attachment style, a lot of your triggers are going to be related to you not feeling heard or safe or loved or cared for by someone in your life. It's going to be something that speaks to what you think is the most important thing in your life right now, but that other people are possibly trying to take away from you, at least in your self-perception. It may trigger a piece of your negative self-talk. Sometimes when we're the harshest with other people, it's a part of yourself that you don't like. So I found, for example, for a lot of my patients are like, oh, I really hate it when my sister's late or whatever. And then it's funny because they're always late. And they're always late to sessions with me. And I'm like, can I just offer an observation that you're talking?
What does that mean? Like, why would that happen?
Because it's part of the reason why so many of us hold a mirror to ourselves, but like not truly in a actually truthful way. Like, we hold the mirror to ourselves, but we see an image that we hope we're projecting to the world. But if we're really honest with what we're actually reflecting out to the world, sometimes we're the harshest towards people when something within us hasn't been resolved, and it's a part of you that you don't like about yourself. So I've definitely found that some people who, when they say, oh my gosh, like I just really hate it when other people are late, they are often late themselves. They often overbook their own schedules. But it's a part of them that they're working on. They want to get better. But in the meantime, they tend to judge other people harshly, because truly the mirror that they're holding to themselves when they're being honest is like, I don't like this part about myself. So
I don't want to derail, but something just really hit me in real time that I want to ask you. Is that why sometimes if someone cheats on their partner, they then get jealous of their partner as if their partner's cheating, but they're the one that cheated?
Yeah. Right? And that's such a common occurrence for people. I remember the first big relationship I had was in college, and he was a wonderful human being, but in his last relationship, he cheated on his girlfriend, and our entire relationship, he was constantly obsessed with whether or not I was cheating on him. And I was like, where does this even come from? I was like, I've never cheated on anybody, and you did, so why are you? But then as we talked about it, and he's really good with insight, so once we discussed it more, he's like, I think it's because I know how it can happen, because it happened to me, and I don't think of myself as a terrible person. I know that I'm a good person. I know I'm a loving person, and it still happened to me. And it's not that he wasn't taking responsibility for it, but it was more just like, well, I generally think of myself as a decent person, and I still cheated on my ex-girlfriend. So even if I think you're a decent person and you love me, I can see how it can happen. Makes sense, right? But it's also something that I know he felt a lot of shame about, and he was not happy with the fact that he did it. And he knows how much he hurt his ex-girlfriend. And so I think for all those reasons, sometimes our triggers are related to things that we wish, maybe we didn't do, or it wasn't a part of us that we were still working out.
Yeah. Wow, God, that just hit me in real time. That's fascinating. Okay, so how do we, when we get triggered, what do we do in order to emotionally equalize?
Yeah, so the first thing is, when you're triggered, don't expect yourself to react in a logical or sensible or even thoughtful way. So again, if you do react like that, that's your first action out. Please have self-compassion, because when you're triggered, essentially your fight or flight is being like, we have to activate now. And when your fight or flight activates, it's searching for survival. It is literally looking for like the common, just like the lowest denominator. Like it's not looking for like the most actualized, most thoughtful response. It's like, how do I protect myself right now? And so sometimes there's going to be missteps. And so don't be upset with yourself, first of all, if you notice that you're doing that. But I think the next thing that's really important is, instead of thinking about these sophisticated things you're going to do, these amazing coping strategies you've learned in therapy or whatnot, you have to just think about regulating your nervous system first. Because if you don't take your brain and your body out of that fight or flight response, you're not going to do the more proactive, more thoughtful thing. So very, very quickly, it's like, how do we quickly regulate? I love this acronym called TIP. TIP is a dialectical behavior strategy, but it's basically 4 techniques folded into one. But if you can just remember TIP, T-I-P-P, then you can do these things either in rapid succession or just focus on one of the 4 when you feel like you're being triggered. T stands for temperature. So that's about lowering your body temperature. We know from research that when you lower your body temperature, it automatically starts taking you out of the fight or flight. Your mind doesn't have to be first. As long as your body temperature is lowered, your mind will follow and be like, oh, well, I guess it's not that stressful after all.
Is that because when you get stressed, your body temperature goes up?
Rises, yep. Because when you're in fight or flight, your basal temperature rises. It's trying to get you ready for action to maybe defend yourself and defend your life. And so temperature can be easily manipulated by just splashing some cold water on your face. If it's a cold day, stepping outside for a couple of minutes, getting an ice cube from the fridge and putting it to the back of your neck. If you're actually privy and have the time, get in the shower, but make it a lukewarm shower. All of these things will lower your body temperature and can be done in less than 1 minute. And of course, a shower, maybe longer than that. But that's why some people do these cold dunks and cold baths, because that's kind of a sense of trying to manipulate your body temperature for relaxation. Now, I don't find it super relaxing to be in a super cold bath, but some people swear by it when they have the time. So try it if you think you're one of those people. I stands for intense exercise. So sometimes people think about this and they're like, well, I don't have the time to do a 20-minute run right now. And that's not what we're asking. We're just saying, hey, you know what? Wherever you are, do something that'll elevate your heart rate. For a lot of people, it's as simple as like 20 jumping jacks or just, running in place. But essentially that intense exercise physicalizes your emotional stress and takes it out of your mind and into your body. And so that can be very regulating for some people, nervous system wise.
Just like releasing almost the energy that is kind of ramping up maybe in your brain.
Exactly. And the crazy thing is, even with like a couple of minutes of exercise, people find, and we've seen this in studies when they measure saliva levels of hormones, that your testosterone goes up and your cortisol goes down. So that's actually a stress management technique. Yeah. So it's really interesting how it can work even just with 2 minutes of activity.
Explain why then, like, people are like, oh no, you should meditate. Because it seems like jumping jacks is the complete opposite to meditate. But when you're stressed, like, which one do you know to do? Or is it just to the individual? Because it seems like a very different technique.
Yeah, I think it's to the individual. Although I would say that when people have to meditate or want to meditate, that's when they're not necessarily in a fight or flight response. Because how could you focus on meditating if you're like, like you're about to like scream at someone, right? So so the meditation might be the second step. It's like once you've done the tip, then it's like, okay, well now my thoughts are a little collected. I'm not in fight or flight anymore. might be a good time to do a mindfulness exercise and try to really extend that feeling of calm, right? So I almost think of mindfulness and meditation, they're absolutely necessary, but they might be step 2 when you're already triggered. Yeah. And then P, so then there's T, I, P, and P. It's called paired relaxation or paired tensing and relaxation. There's like kind of different ways that you can talk about that piece. But the paired relaxation is all about tensing different parts of your body and then relaxing them. And it's really about being in tune with where you are holding stress. Because a lot of us, when we're stressed out, we don't even know that we're holding tension in our necks, or like it's like a weird crick in your, your calf or something. So this exercise just involves you quickly doing a body scan and then noting the areas that might be tense, and then oddly, and sometimes people feel like this is contradictory, but there's an important method to it. You tense that part even more for 5 seconds, and then you really let it all go. The reason is then you really understand the difference between when that particular muscle or body part is really tense versus like how it truly feels to actually relax. And it helps a lot of people just kind of get into a different state. Like, okay, first, you have control over how much tensing and relaxing you can do, but 2, that within a minute, you can really transform the way that your body is responding to stress. And that's why I think that when people really get into all of this nervous system regulation types of techniques, they realize not only how simple it is, it's all free, but also how quickly it works. Because if you're trying to wrestle with your mind or your thought process when you're triggered, it's just not gonna work. Your thoughts are not gonna bring you back to a state of calm. So you have to sort of access them through the body first. The last P is paced breathing. So paced breathing is awesome because it's also free and it's quick. Everybody has their favorite deep breathing exercise. I think most of us are taking shallow breaths when we're in a fight or flight response. And
or hold our breaths.
Yeah, we hold our breaths. We don't even realize we're holding our breaths. Yeah, exactly. And so my favorite paced breathing is box breathing, but people have different ones. So I'll just talk really quickly over 2 of them. Box breathing means that you're holding your breath for 4 counts, breathing in for 4, holding your breath again for 4, breathing out for 4. And so essentially what I do is I just draw a box as I'm doing each of the 4 counts. Yeah, so it's kind of like hold for 4, breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. You just kind of do this a few times. It's really helpful for people who like to keep track with something that's visual or kinesthetic. And I really enjoy that because it kind of activates different parts of my body and also makes sure I'm staying at a steady pace as I'm counting. But some people also really like 4, 7, 8 breathing. That's essentially just like, okay, the whole idea is to try to make the exhale a little bit longer. So the 4, 7, 8 breathing is about breathing in for 4, holding for 7, and then breathing out for 8. So you just essentially try, I know that's a lot of breathing out, but it helps you to, I guess, get into this idea of breathing slowly. Because again, those shallow breaths or holding breaths, now you're really getting into idea of, okay, I'm going to slow my breathing down, which is going to signal to my brain that I'm not in a fight or flight situation. And then you can take those next steps. But I think there's a lot of other nervous system regulation strategies. People don't even realize how simple some of these are, but humming, singing, making a voo sound like this, voo.
And specifically touching, because
I think
people are listening,
it kind of
touching
resonates.
your neck.
You're kind of touching like the bottom, I guess like it's kind of like the top of your neck where your chin and like right under your ears. When you do the voo, that vibration is vibrating your vagus nerve. And when your vagus nerve is stimulated, you're also getting to in that rest and relaxation phase. It's a type of nervous regulation, system regulation strategy. And so there's so many of these quick things that once you do it, then you can be in the mindset to say, all right, now maybe is a time to meditate, or now is a time to just get clear on my thinking. Like, why am I being triggered in this situation? And what is the best thoughtful way to respond so I don't feel sorry about what I did later and then have to clean up to this mess? Because that's what happens sometimes when we respond after a trigger. It's like, oh man, I really wish I didn't yell at my partner like that, or why did I do something so impulsive? Well, you did it because your body is trying to survive that moment. But if you can take it out of that survival mode, then you're going to be able to self-actualize and do something that you'll be proud of afterwards.
I love that so much. Okay, so people need to do tip. That's ice cube on the neck. I think that's easy.
Yeah.
So ice cube on the neck, jumping jacks, the breathing and then the clenching and releasing of muscles.
Yep, exactly. And hopefully easy to remember now that you have the acronym.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, is there any difference between genders in regards to the attachment styles? Are there more likely more female attachment styles and men attachment styles? And then what is the difference of those two attachment styles if there's different genders interacting with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, again, based on what we see in pop psychology, I think people often relate the anxious attachment style to women more so, and the avoidant attachment style to men more so. And the disorganized attachment is kind of like a toss-up. Again, with the research, you kind of can see that it can happen for both genders. I think part of that, though, that we see, for example, more anxious attachment in women, avoidant in men, is more so also our social and cultural constructs, because women, again, culturally, societally, are thought to be the more nurturing of the two genders. And they're supposed to be more caring for others and maybe more prone to things like codependency and like serving others' needs before their own, et cetera. And I don't know if that's 100% true. I think that genders do have something to do with attachment style, but I think that it's just that it expresses itself differently. So men may be just as prone to anxious attachment, but they display those codependent behaviors slightly differently than women. So with women, they tend to rescue people in their immediate environment. They rescue people who are close family members, their romantic partner. The codependency occurs essentially in their daily life with the people that they're in the closest relationship with. What I've seen with men in anxious attachment styles is that they'll be more broad with the way that they might be seeking assurance and codependency. They may be seeking it more from coworkers. It's like, well, why do you care what this person thinks? You might see them once a year at a conference, but they care. Or they take on so many people to mentor. It's like, so many. Do you really need 50 people who are seeking your mentorship at any given time? Probably not. But that's where their rescuing occurs. So it may not occur more in intimate relationships, but it occurs in a wider set of people that they interact with.
Yeah, it makes actually complete sense, especially when you said it's like part of society, where you'd said earlier, it's like, well, it's based both, it's nature and nurture. And when I think about us as young girls, always being told, don't rock the boat, do what everyone says, stay quiet, be, quote unquote, the good girl.
Right.
That really does echo to guys as well, where if a young boy is upset over something and they're, let's say they cry, I just know they've told you got to man up. And so that idea of you can't show emotion then actually makes sense that then leads to more men having that attachment style because that's what they've been taught growing up based on society.
Exactly. And obviously parents do react differently to the people in their families. This is why siblings will have different reactions. They'll say, well, the mom you got was like this, the mom I got. And there's truism to that. And sometimes parents have blind spot about it. They'll say, no, like they grew up in the same household. How could they be so different? It's like, well, you gave one of them this message and the other one this other message whenever they were stressed. And so you're absolutely right about that. And that's why I think avoidantly attached is more ascribed to men. But also, I do see avoidant attachment in women as well. It's just that I've also seen that women carry a bit more guilt than men with avoidant attachment because it's like, oh, what are you, like this uncaring person? All you care about is your career. Like there's more social commentary, I think, when people act in avoidantly attached ways as a female versus a male. It's almost like, well, you just can't do any wrong. Like you're amazing at your career. How do I be more like you? So they're getting different messages as they're displaying some of these traits to society, even when they're adults.
Are there certain traits that are more likely for someone to lie and cheat and manipulate you and use you, like really actually be, obviously I just listed, it sounds like the evil person in the movie, but like, you know, these people that really are, there are people out there that, a lot of my audience feel like they've been trapped in relationships where somebody has emotionally abused them or, psychologically manipulated them. What type of trait, is there an attachment trait that actually is more tied to?
Yeah, I think that the manipulation and the actively lying and deceiving, it may not be tied to attachment style specifically, but it may be an interaction of attachment style and perhaps a personality disorder. So obviously, even supposedly securely attached people could have a personality disorder, but I would say that that's much more rare. Mostly it's people who have really unresolved attachment that might also have a personality disorder. And it's because they've become very rigid in the way that they cope with stress, to the point where now it's developing into personality traits that are not serving them, that are harming other people in their lives. And I think that there are certain things associated with each one. So, there is some research, although it's not strong, that some individuals with disorganized attachment are more prone or more at risk to developing borderline personality disorder.
Really?
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense when you think about borderline personality being someone who, again, when they're not treated yet and when they're still dealing with those issues, having concerns with having these swings in their relationships. Like, I hate you, don't leave me. I love you one minute, I hate you the next, right? There's a lot of chaos and disorganization in their day-to-day relationships. Also, their sense of self tends to be really unstable, and they seem like they're lashing out at people at times, especially when they're stressed. All of that's coming from that place of being in fight or flight more often than not. And so there is somewhat of an association with that. People with avoidant attachment, they tend to be more associated with more of a seemingly narcissistic personality style. The reason for that is the avoidantly attached person has learned that talking about emotions doesn't really serve them. It's not something that helps them, and they can't rely on other people, so they have to get everything themselves. So over time, it develops into narcissistic qualities. But as you probably know from your work, Lisa, 90% of narcissists are defensive narcissists. Really, if you ask them, what's really behind the fact that you supposedly think that you're the best thing alive, there's a huge insecurity underneath that they're hiding from everybody. It's like, and that kind of goes along with avoidant attachment, because it's like, well, if people knew about my vulnerabilities, they'd take advantage of it. So I got to hide all that away. And even if I don't believe in myself, I'm going to tell you I believe in myself and make you treat me that way because I didn't get this kind of respect or nurturing when I was younger.
And that's why they then end up going for the anxious attached, because they're the person that's going to be like almost forgive the behavior.
Right. Forgive the behavior, still stick around because they just want that, like, once you give them like one little nugget of reassurance, they're like, okay, I'm still here, And so that can be really tough, but that's why there is that attraction. And then with the individual who is anxiously attached, they're more likely to display dependent personality traits. Again, no surprise, where it's like, they don't feel right when they're on their own for too long. They don't ever, like, they're serial daters oftentimes, where it's like one long relationship to the next long relationship. Anxiously attached people are not necessarily prone to having 10 or 15 rapid relationships. They're more prone to having long-term relationships, but then right from that long-term relationship, get into another long-term relationship. So then it becomes really hard, like, which one's the rebound? Because each one was 2 years, right? But it's because they're so wanting to be with somebody, to be locked in with somebody, because they fear their own thoughts. I've had anxious attached people tell me, I don't want to be alone for too long. If my partner's traveling, I busy myself with a huge social schedule because I'm afraid of what my mind is going to cook up when I'm alone. And so these individuals are more prone to display dependent personality styles, where with big decisions especially, it's like, well, unless I check it with all 5 important people in my social circle right now, I'm not going to make that decision, because what if I'm wrong? They just really question themselves all the time, and they're really plagued with these fears of what might happen to them if they're alone.
And does that show up mostly in relationships over things like career and goals and things like that?
Yeah, it shows up in relationships of all types, but in careers, people with anxious attachment oftentimes will start to attend to their social environment much more than what they have to do. So they end up getting caught up because they're constantly seeing if everybody's still okay. And like, do you still like me? They like insert themselves in the middle of like the social arena of their work, but then that might take them away from the things that they actually have to do. And they may just mull over things that someone said yesterday, still today, they're thinking about it. Well, what do they really mean by that? Do they still care about me? Well, maybe I should do something to solve this problem. So my patients with anxious attachment, they're the most prone to somebody walking down the hallway at work, saying hi to them. That person didn't seem to be super enthusiastic. And then for the rest of the day, they're like, what did I do wrong? Are they still okay with me? Instead of being able to just say, you know what? Maybe that's on them. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe I caught them when I said hi to them in the hallway because they were deep in thought about something else. But instead of thinking that maybe it's about them, they think, oh, I caused that, right? And then they end up wasting a lot of time trying to overanalyze a situation that they really don't need to do that with.
So you're more likely to stay in a relationship that doesn't serve you. Are you then more likely to be in a career that maybe you hate, or study something that your parents told you to, even though you don't want to, because you're so desperate to get that that people pleasing, that validation?
Yeah, because it's absolutely true, because they start to essentially forget their own needs in the process. And what do they want? They don't have that clarity. So they do things that other people think are good, or what they believe other people think are good. And then they don't end up self-actualizing in the ways that they really want. And they also sometimes don't have the confidence to say, you know what? This career or this job is not working for me anymore, and it's time to do something else, because they don't tend to have the confidence in that arena of their life. You know, they may be more prone to say, you know what, this is good enough. This is good enough. Like, I'm okay with this, you know? But that's why they're also deriving so much of their joy and meaning from how everybody else responds, rather than, oh, well, I'm so happy about this individual project that I started and am working on. They've come to be much more reliant on how other people are feeling towards them as a way to secure themselves, as opposed to, well, this is what I really want if I asked myself and I was honest about it.
So how would you know then, based on everything that we're talking about, I really want to like put everything together now. So if you're in a moment of, okay, you really know that you're an insecure attachment person. You've said earlier, if you're with someone that's secure, that can really help you. How do you know someone's a secure attached person? If we all know being with a partner, let's just say, or a friend, or like, look for someone that's secure. How do you know? Like, what are those things that you can do? I don't want to say test, because you actually said earlier you shouldn't be testing.
Yeah, right.
But like, what are the signs that someone actually is a secure person, that for you to know really if it's, you know, safe or secure to be with them?
Yeah, for sure. So some big signs. One is that who they believe they're made up of, what their self-concept derives of, which of course they're not going to talk about in that specific way.
Yeah.
But like how they involve themselves in different activities, how you think that they are spending their time on most days, is really a collection of different things as opposed to just one. People with avoidant attachment, they're very career focused, but then almost at the exclusion of so many other things. Person who's securely attached, yeah, that's a big part of what they're doing. Maybe they love their career, they're doing some important things, but also they're still making time for dinners with their family. They're still making time to check in with their best friends. You know, are they somebody who kind of has a plethora of different things that fill their life that seem almost equally important, or at least marginally equally important? That's one way that you can find out, is like, okay, is this person kind of a well-rounded person where there's different aspects of their lives that go into, hopefully, their development of who they are. Secondly is kind of a Goldilocks rule with boundaries. Someone whose boundaries is a little too firm, it's like, oh, you're really holding me at arm's length. That's more of like an avoidant person. Somebody whose boundaries are way too permeable, it's like you're calling them at midnight, like, can you talk to me? It's like, yeah, I can talk to you. I don't care if it's for 4 hours either. It's fine. You know, like, that's somebody who might be more anxiously attached. But somebody who holds boundaries in just the right ways. Like one way is like, hey, I will help you. I can't right now. Can I help you after work? Right? It's sort of this give and take of, there is a middle ground that they're trying to achieve when they exert their boundaries, and they are firm about it, but there's a little bit of permeability, you know? Obviously, in special situations, they are gonna say, hey, yes, of course, you're going through a crisis. I will talk to you at midnight for a couple hours. Or, you know what, this is the third time you've made this call. I can't do it every day. So let's talk over the weekend when I have more time, right? So that's really, really important. Another aspect of this is during times of stress, do they generally still believe in themselves? Do they generally still say, hey, this is a really tough time, but I do think I can get through it, especially with your help, or if I use these resources, right? But they feel like they can get through tough times without completely going to pieces, without a lot of negative self-talk, doubting themselves, or without lashing out at people, which can happen with some of the insecure attachment styles, where because they're so dysregulated, they start acting out in ways around them that don't make sense. So that's another big piece. The last piece is, do they generally believe that they deserve good things in life? How do they talk to you? How do they seem to talk about themselves? Do they generally say, yeah, you know what, if I work hard, if I work on these skill sets, I do deserve good things? Or are they saying, you know what, I don't even deserve this. I don't even know why people are giving me this opportunity. Is there a lot of deprecation? If you notice so much deprecation, that's probably a hallmark of more of an insecure attachment style.
Ooh, so good, girl. That was so good. Okay, I've got 2 questions to ask you.
Yes.
Okay, first of all, if someone's listening now, we've just laid everything out.
Yep.
They're still not necessarily convinced. I don't know, that sounds like a lot of work. That's going to take, like, because it is, right? I understand it.
Right.
You have something called the miracle question.
Yes.
And this, homie, I think everyone needs to be asked this question because I think that this will highlight why people need to do this work.
Yeah, the miracle question is such a fun, to me, a really fun therapeutic technique that can be easily implemented wherever you are, which is if you woke up tomorrow morning and your life is as you hoped or dreamed it would be, if you allowed yourself to dream and said, what would my ideal life be like? Ideal life doesn't mean you don't have any problems. Ideal life just means this is something that I think I could get to, but I'm not there yet. Like, what would that actually look like? Paint a vivid picture. For some people, it's easy for them just to talk it out. For other people, it's easier for them to write it down, to journal about it, right? But really ask yourself this question and let your imagination run wild. Like, what would you imagine if you woke up the next day and most of your big problems in life were gone and you were able to achieve essentially a form of an ideal life? Take me through the day. How would it feel when you woke up? What would be the first thing you do? What would be the next thing you do? What would your thoughts be like? How would you feel? And that's when you really see the discrepancy between where you might be right now and where you need to go. And if you can ask yourself that question and you lay this out and you're saying, yeah, I'm pretty much there. Like, my ideal life is what I'm living right now. Then good for you.
Amazing.
That's awesome. I would say 99% of people don't feel that way. They'll say, you know what, there's one or two areas of life that I really wish were coming together more. And I really now see the discrepancy by laying it out of like, what would my day actually was like today versus the day that I should be having if I asked myself this miracle question and was honest. And that's a great barometer to start in terms of, do I still have some work in this area to tackle?
I love that so much because what it does is it allows you to take away, because you even said, right, what if all the big problems weren't there? Because I think so many of us focus on the big problems. I get it because you're going through it. It's a problem. So you're going through that emotional process. But if you take that away, it kind of then takes away, I don't mean this in a mean way, but it takes away any excuse.
Right.
And it says, imagine all the excuses, because people will say like, oh, I want this life, but I can't because blah, 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 blah. It's like, if you took away the but and the blah, 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 paint that picture and now go, what would that life look like? Once you've painted that life and you said, if my problems were away, now what it leads you to do is say, what would now I have to do in order to make my problems go away?
Exactly.
Because you've painted the picture of what you're trying to get to now instead of being stuck in the problem mode.
Exactly. That's such a good point, because oftentimes we do get stuck in our problems and we start to over worry about our problems. Like, how is it going to resolve? How is it not going to resolve? Like you said, it contributes to the excuses that we make to not actually do the work that we can do to achieve better outcomes in our lives. But if you remove that barrier, then it's about, okay, what are the steps I need to take to get to this idealized version of my life? And even if my life wasn't perfect, like, you start to really understand the steps that you need to take to be able to incrementally start moving toward that process.
Yeah, like something so small, but I've noticed that I've started to kind of like really look forward to the weekends more than I used to, but I love what I do. So I was like, there's an indication here. So that I'm not enjoying my weekdays as much as I used to. Cool. What do I now need to do? Right, just go into solve mode. What are the steps I now need to take, back to your point of, so that I can change my life, so that I can lead to my ideal life? And they may be small. It may be like now, I'm just waking up and I'm taking 20 minutes to sit with my puppy. I'm looking at the view outside and I'm stroking her and I'm drinking my cup of coffee. And so like, that's just one moment that I'm doing for myself every single day. It's very small, but now it's allowing me to enjoy my life more because I was doing it on the weekend and I wasn't doing it during the week.
Wow. Yeah.
Takes the blinders off of like, okay, instead of just suffering through it, which I did that for 8 years. I just kept suffering through it. I kept saying, I'm going to look for happiness when?
Right. When I'm done with this, when I finish this goal. Yeah. And we all do that to ourselves until we realize how these small changes can really make a big difference. I'm really glad that you brought that example of like, it was literally a small shift of 20 minutes of essentially some mindful, cuddly time with a pet, as opposed to just going right into my day and like, okay, what's next? But so many of us try to put off our ideal life for a variety of reasons. When this problem's resolved, when my depression lifts, when I finally work through my PTSD, when I'm in a better relationship, when I finally get that promotion. Like, why are you depriving yourself of the happiness and joy you can be experiencing every single day? Because we don't really know how many more days we have. I mean, that's the beauty and the sadness of the human existence. Is like, you don't know. So you have to live every single day to the best of your ability, striving for that ideal life, and be happy now, be joyful now, and do those meaningful things now.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, and then the second part of that question is, now that you've asked the miracle question, someone's like, all right, I get it, I need to do the work, I'm an insecure attachment, I want to get to secure. What are 3 things they can start to do immediately in order for them to shift from an insecure attachment to secure?
Yeah, well, the first thing is really prioritize your self-care. And for different types, your self-care will look different. People who are anxiously attached, they might be most drawn to self-care that involves other people. Because again, that's part of their pattern. It's like, I want to be with people and I want them to validate me and I'm kind of scared to do something by myself. I would say, really take your mind out of autopilot, because maybe you're saying, oh, I do self-care. But it's like, okay, but when have you done something just on your own as a form of self-care? Literally just by yourself.
So it has to be on your own.
Yeah, well, for the anxiously attached. Whereas for the avoidantly attached, it's like, you know what? Maybe you're doing a lot of things on your own. You're like, I'm training for a marathon. That's my self-care. Yeah, except you're doing everything by yourself. And you're not in a running group. And you're not like opening yourself up to like, oh, well, maybe my self-care to challenge myself is like a family-based activity. Something my wife wants to do, something my children want to do, and I'm just going to show up and let them plan the day, as opposed to me in my controlling like self wanting to like have, you know, agency over everything. So it's about prioritizing your self-care, but in a way that shifts your attachment towards the other side of the balance, right? So like really allow yourself to brainstorm self-care that isn't your usual, that takes you out of some of the patterns of your particular insecure attachment style. Really challenge yourself. That's a big piece of the beginning of that healing. It's just getting to the other side.
So now question, if you're a disorganized attachment style, are you more likely with the self-care to like just try and rush through it? Like what does that then look like? Because you broke down the other 2, which I didn't even think about that they would be different.
Yeah, it's such a good point about disorganized attachment, because you're used to being in chaos. So your self-care will be really chaotic as well. Like you're like, this is my self-care moment, but you're running at the same time that you're on the phone on a business call. And then you're like, gotta cut my call short because, you know, I gotta do this other thing and blah, blah, blah. It just feels like you're constantly solving crisis after crisis. So with the self-care of the disorganized attached, it's about like, allowing yourself, and it's through increments, you know, first day maybe 15 minutes, second day maybe 20, is like more and more time in peaceful activity, various forms of mindfulness and visualization. And I always say to people when they're like, well, that doesn't relax me. It's like, okay, but ask yourself why it doesn't relax you. Like, maybe that actually shows you need to do that more than everybody else, you know? As somebody, as we've talked about, who's like, you know, has these shadows of avoidant attachment, I used to just hate yoga with a vengeance. I was just like, this isn't for me. But a couple of yoga teachers have pointed out, like, it might mean that you need yoga the most out of anybody, that you're fighting it so much. I'm like, oh, maybe you're right. And you know what? If I let myself slow down enough to do it, it really does benefit me. So I think I've just challenged yourself in your own self-talk. If you're saying that's not going to work for me, it's like, yeah, but it's a reason why there's a part of you that's fighting through that. So try the other thing. Try the thing you don't usually try for self-care. So I think that that's one big thing. The second thing is really dig into what reparenting means for you. Reparenting for different people means different things. It can be very concrete, or it can be things that feel a little bit more amorphous. All of it is reparenting. But it's the idea of, you know, regularly checking in with yourself and saying, what do I need in this moment? Like, be honest. What is it that I need? Do I just need more support from people around me? Do I just need to take a break? Like, how can I give that to myself in some small way today? I don't think that we often check in with ourselves enough, and especially our inner children, because our inner child has been tucked away at some point because you think society doesn't accept it. Society doesn't like it when you talk about your negative feelings. Society doesn't like it when you make things about yourself. It has to be about me all the time. Like, you get these messages from childhood. And so really checking in to say, hey, like, the part of me that's kind of this unadulterated child that might have, childish ideas, but at the same time, they're important ideas. What does that part of myself want today? And then finding some small way to fulfill that for them. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes you're super busy, so you can't. So if your inner child is like, I want to play, like, I'm sick of responsibility, I want to play. It's like, well, sorry, we're in the middle of the work week. Can't play that much. But we can do something like research an upcoming vacation for 30 minutes after I get home from work. Like that's one way to nurture your inner child, even if you can't take the vacation right now, right? So that's another piece. And I think the third thing is to really hone your intuition. If we were to really get clear on what we truly want and what really feels right to us, I think our insecure attachments would be, really kind of on their way to being healed in a very palpable way that would feel significant to us. But our intuitions get really messed up over time with messaging from other people, what we think our parents want, what we think our partners want, what we think society wants, right? And it's really about honing that part of your brain, which is scientific. A lot of times people think, oh, intuition is just a feeling. It's a feeling because it's based in the base part of your brain that isn't sophisticated in language. So it can't verbally produce the idea of like why this feels right, but it feels right because of your experience and what you know your values to be. And so really honing and asking yourself before you make a decision, like, how does this really feel to me? Like my gut reaction, and like not dismissing your gut reaction and then clouding it with all the self-talk that comes from all these other messages you're getting, and just being like, if I follow my intuition and my gut feeling, there is a science behind it, and it's going to make me feel like a more consistent and coherent person. And then you start to be more confident in yourself in all the different things that you want to tackle.
Dr. Judy Ho, my homie, this has been so amazing. Thank you for breaking that down. Where can people find you and your freaking amazing book, which is basically everything that we've been speaking about, if they want to dive deeper and really learn this stuff?
You can find me on social media at Dr. Judy Ho. Instagram is my primary platform, or you can find me on my website, drjudyho.com. I always have free resources. If you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get those on a weekly basis too.
If you want to learn the absolute truth about attraction and desire, then keep watching.
I mean, I can tell you, like with any attachment style, it started with the wounds of neglect, wounds of emotional abuse and hypercriticism, wounds of addiction, for the child who was raised by those people, right? So someone who's got an avoidant attachment style would be more of someone who's coined more narcissistic acting, right? So their wounds are more around hypercriticism and abandonment, but a lot of like, you're bad, you're wrong, you don't, and the adults around you not being in control and not protecting you. So you have to kind of step in. The only one who can keep you safe is you. And in adulthood, that's still driving the bus.
Wow, so how do you take, once you've assessed your trauma and you acknowledge where your attachment styles are, how do you start to, I don't want to say unwind, but how do you start to maybe detach yourself from all of your past history, and not as in ignore it or shove it under a rug, right? But actually work through it so that you can then begin to start having a successful relationship, whether you're just starting your relationship or whether you're in the middle of your relationship.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I like to talk to the people that I teach and work with about this idea of like inviting your wounds to tea, having tea with them and making friends with them and wanting to understand them. Because once you do, when you come at it as the consciousness of the adult you are now, right? This one, you can look at and talk to those wounds, inside yourself like you would a child or a best friend. There's an integration that happens. And there's also a level of awareness that happens, because once you've looked at it and you've put it on the table and you've interacted with it, it's no longer in the basement. It's no longer in your unconscious mind. It's the same thing that I almost do with people who have a lot of inhibitions, right, in the bedroom. And we'll get into that later. But I'll often have them list all the things that they believe a nice girl or a good man or whatever that is do and don't do.
In the bedroom.
In the bedroom. Yeah. All the shoulds about that and shouldn'ts. And then in the next column, where did that message come? Like, where'd you get that story? Oh, it was when my aunt caught me playing with myself and told me I was wrong, bad, or dirty. And I just always remembered that. Now it's outside of you, right? Now, which of these do you, as the adult you are now, still really believe about yourself and want to proactively subscribe to? maybe 3 things on that list, right? So now every time that story comes up, and it's the same thing with shame, every time that story comes up, now it's in your conscious awareness. Now you're like, oh, there's that little cute boo-boo from the basement coming up and making me want to, you know, yell at my partner right now, or making me want to, you know, not really see this red flag. So you start to recognize, once it's outside of you and it's in front of you and you've had tea with it and you've had compassion for those parts of yourselves, because it's always related to a strategy. You know, all of these wounds and the way we respond to them is how we survive our childhood. And they all have gifts, right? Like you were just saying before we shot that you're very, you know, you're OCD, right? You jokingly call yourself OCD because you're making sure all the lights and the cameras and everything are all set. That's an amazing gift, right? That's an amazing gift that you are so on top of it and you're so detail oriented and you've got it all covered. That's the light, beautiful side of the gift. There's also a shadow and a wound underneath that gift.
Ooh.
Right? And that's the way it is with our wounds too. There's a beautiful gift. It's a strategy, right? It's probably a strategy that you adopted really early in a chaotic environment that somehow made you feel safe, that made you feel like you could control your environment and calmed your nervous system down when you did things that, the few things you could do that made you feel in control of your environment. And so that's the wound underneath it, but it's a beautiful gift. It's just that you want to call on the gift rather than have the gift just choose you.
That's so freaking amazing. And I've heard you also talk about like, what do you actually want to feel?
Yes, that's everything.
Because how much of us, whether we're starting dating, in the middle of a relationship, you're like, do they tick the boxes?
Yes.
Right? Do they earn a certain amount? Do they want children? Do they, you know, what religion are they?
Yeah.
Those are kind of like the boxes we normally tick.
Yes.
But I love that, you know, I've heard you say, like, actually write down 5 feelings you want from that person.
That's all that matters. Honestly, anything you want, including in love, but anything you want to happen in your life or that you want to acquire or achieve, it is only because you want a certain feeling. That's it. The only reason you want that fancy house or fancy car is because how you imagine you're going to feel when you have that thing. The only reason you want that kind of partner, whatever that description is because of how we want to feel. But we never start with the feelings. And the reason it's so important is because that's our internal motivation anyway. So you're cutting out all the crap and you're getting clear. But also, it turns out on an energetic level, we are creating our own reality at all times. We are energetic beings. We are full atomic energy. And our energy, it's like a frequency that is constantly shifting and changing. And we're constantly matching each other, right? So you and I are doing what's called entrainment right now. So our frequencies are kind of finding a happy medium. In fact, you're probably entraining to me only because I'm consciously holding a frequency.
Interesting, okay.
And so our frequency is actually set by our feelings. So if you get clear on the main, it's not the height, the job, the kids, if you woke up every single day next to the person of your dreams, how would you feel? Would you feel safe? Would you feel playful? Would you feel adventurous? Would you feel passionate? Would you feel connected? You know, what are the feelings you most want to feel in love? And then that becomes your compass for everything, not just dating. Every decision you make, and this is how I make New Year's resolutions. I make feeling resolutions so that every decision I make, does this contribute to how I want to feel or not? And if not, no, thank you.
And that's amazing. Do you suggest people then do that initially before going, like, let's say, meeting somebody? And then how often do you assess that? Because I think as you were talking, I was like, I don't know if my list would be the same when I first met my husband compared to now.
Yeah.
So how do you know what partner to choose based on the fact that you're always going to grow? Or is it like things that you'll always want, like safety?
Yes.
At no point in your age do you go, I don't care about the safety aspect anymore.
Right. Yeah. And it's okay if it changes, because who you are when you get together with someone may be very different than who you are 10 years from now. Probably will be. How the two of you can grow together and evolve with those changes says everything about whether you're going to last or not, right? But you still can't get past, if you're looking for love right now, how you want to feel. You can't think about, you don't know who you're going to be 10 years from now to think about how you're going to feel, right? And all that is real is right now. I mean, God forbid, anything can happen anytime, right? So we don't know what's going to happen an hour from now, much less 10 years from now. The only thing we know is real is this right here, right now. And so how do I want to feel? Now, if I get clear, if I were looking for love and I were to say, you know, the 3 top feelings that I most want to feel in love with my ideal partner is playful, connected, and romantic, right? I am now going to marinate in those feelings as much as possible, not necessarily even in my dating life, because I may not even have a date yet, but I'm going to look for opportunities to feel connected. I'm going to call in situations that make me feel playful, right? And as you do that, that becomes your energetic frequency. And then you become a magnet, literally, to people and situations that match that feeling, that match that frequency, including romantic partners. So if you know, in the way that I like to teach this is 2 ways. One is to look for those opportunities just to be in the energy of those feelings you most want to feel as much as possible. Amen. That's a really fun way to live, right? But also to move there in your imagination. So I even do this in my almost 20-year marriage to my husband. If I'm about to have a conversation with him that I know may be touchy for him, or I want him to show up a certain way in the relationship, I go there in my mind's eye, like I almost do a meditation. And you can do this before a date, even if you don't know who that person is and they have no face, right? But here's the key to moving your body into the frequency of feelings through your imagination, is that the body and the brain don't know the difference between reality and rehearsal, okay? So when you are imagining, but you have to imagine in first person as if it's happening right here, right now. So you're not watching yourself.
Okay.
But you're in the scene, right? So you want to feel, adventurous in your relationship. Let's just choose that feeling. In your mind's eye, you either think of a time that you felt unbelievably adventurous with someone and were having an amazing adventure, or you make up a fantasy in your mind of some future partner and you're climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or something, right? Whatever that is. But you are in the scene. You can see your feet, your hands. You're literally in that scene in your mind. And you literally just sit there for 5 or 10 minutes imagining yourself in that scenario. And what is happening is your body is literally moving into the frequency of that sensation.
And is that, like, as you were talking, I was like, wow, that would be really powerful as a way for me to identify when I meet someone, if it kind of matches the sensation that I've created on my own.
Yes, because you will repel people who are not going to match your frequency.
Yeah, this literally, as you were talking, I was like, that's so freaking smart. And also, I've heard you say, which is hilarious, but you do not complete me. Like, no one completes you.
No.
That movie set us all up for disaster.
Oh my God, that pisses me off so badly.
But is part of this then kind of the antidote for people that wait for someone to complete them, where they're envisioning it because you're creating that emotion yourself. You're not almost like waiting for someone else to do it.
And by the way, anytime you are sourcing your fulfillment outside yourself, you're going to eventually fail. It is not sustainable to source the feelings you most want to feel from outside yourself. Then you are always at the effect of other people and situations, and then you're trying to control everything, which is impossible. It's impossible. I'll tell that to your little OCD self too. Like, it's impossible to control anything. The only thing the only thing we can control is how we respond to things, right? That's it. And so when you spend time marinating in the energies of those feelings that you just want to live your life in, I'm not even talking about love, right? This is the secret behind the secret. This is what's underneath manifesting, right? If I write myself a check for $1 million, and just put it on the table and say, why isn't $1 million showing up? It's not going to show up. But if I am living in the frequency of the feeling that I would have when I have that $1 million in my pocket and it's here right now, and I'm in the energy of that feeling, that's when manifestation happens.
I love that, because I'm all about having a North Star and making sure you know what that North Star is. And so I've never really thought of it from a feeling. I've always thought of it from a goal, right? So it's like I set a goal. Okay, the goal is to get the company to be at this point by this day. Okay, am I there? Yes or no? But I never thought about it from a feeling standpoint. That's so beautiful.
And then you add a whole new layer. I mean, obviously that's working for you, right? You've achieved a lot of goals, but it's achieving it through flow rather than force when you do it this way. And it's adding huge momentum behind it. So if you spend time as you're imagining, and when I achieve this goal, this, and this will happen. Okay, let me just tune in for a minute. Let me put myself in that situation in first person in my mind's eye. What do I feel in my body? What does that feel like? How would I name that feeling? Is it joy? Is it excitement? Is it peace? Is it calm? You know, how am I going to feel when that goal is achieved? And then that's what you want to cultivate.
That's so beautiful. I love that. The problem that I actually, as you were saying, goals, the one thing that I found is it's never usually what you think it's going to be.
No.
Like, people will look at even my relationship with my husband and it's like, oh my God, you're so lucky. And, you know, it's like, you know how freaking hard work it is? Like, so me and my husband, we joke about like how exhausting it is. It's a whole other business.
It is.
And so people, I think, see long-term successful marriages and have a understanding of how they think it will feel. And so the truth is that it's never going to be like, I talk about phases, right? Relationship has its phases. You do a scan of someone that's just met someone for the first time and the intoxication, it looks like they were on cocaine.
Yes, literally their brain is responding like it's on cocaine. When they look at people's brains, when they're in a brand new, and it's called the infatuation stage, can't get enough of each other. Your brain, the dopamine centers of your brain are firing like crazy, which is the same addiction center that gets you addicted to Coke or anything else.
Yeah, and so that's fascinating to me because it also makes me understand why people do stay in relationships probably longer than they should because they're trying to get it back.
Yes.
And actually I have a quote of yours about relationships and people being in them too long, because I think the intoxication part of it and the chemistry part of it, and then the want of wanting to feel a certain way, even when you don't get it, there's multiple things. There's one that you, like, people say they're pot committed if you play poker, right? Where it's like, well, I've spent 6 years with this person. I can't just leave now.
I don't want to start over.
I don't want to start over. And then you've got another quote of yours where it says, the pain of being in the relationship has to be greater than your fear of leaving it.
Always.
Or you're not going to leave.
Nope.
Dude, that was so strong.
It's so true. When you are staying in a relationship out of fear, which, let's face it, 99% of those relationships that we really should be leaving, that we stay in, we're staying out of fear of consequences, financial fears, fear about the kids, fear there won't be anyone better, fear I won't find anyone better, fear I've lost too much time. I mean, name your poison, right? There are a million different fears. What has to happen in those cases is either you address those fears, which, let's face it, most of us don't do, right? Or eventually, and it always gets there, eventually the pain of being in that stuck place becomes greater than those fears that are keeping you stuck.
How many people waste their time, though, between that, like, where they're kind of new?
Yeah.
And it becomes like you try, but those years that you're trying really, like, in fact, how do you bypass spending those years where you get to the point where it's like, all right, now it's just too bad, I have to leave, versus like, you just spent 2 years on something that you kind of knew from the get-go. You know,
I'm a big believer that in divine timing, and I know there are often regrets when people finally leave and they're like, why the frick did I waste so much time, right? But once they get over that, they do learn a lot of really important soul lessons from that time, right? So yeah, I would like everyone to get out when the getting's good and not wait too long. But here's the cool thing, and this is something I discovered basically with Quantum Love, is that I had always been, still am a couples therapist, but like most couples therapists, I ideally had both partners in the room with me. And if one of them didn't want to come or wasn't ready to come, a lot of our work with the other one was getting that person in the door or doing as much as I could indirectly since they wouldn't come in. What I have found with working with the energy and the feelings and moving yourself into the frequency of those intentions for your relationship is that I can actually help change the relationship with just one of you. because when you change what's going on inside you, you have to be ready because everything around you will change. And this is what happens when you start practicing this in a love relationship that isn't working for you. Either you're doing your work and you're raising your frequency and you're clearing the stuff that's in the way. The higher your frequency is, the better your life is going to go. So anything from living primarily in curiosity, optimism, excitement, joy, forgiveness, those are all high frequency energies that are going to create much more. Shame, anger, fear, guilt and shame. Shame is the lowest, then guilt frequency, right? That's going to create more of that. So that when you start working just individually and living in those higher frequencies, what I call home frequency, first, your life gets so much better in all aspects. In your relationship, your partner, and it's amazing to me, in love relationships, we are what they call quantum entangled. Our atoms are literally entangled. They've been able to show that couples' heart rates synchronize even when they aren't sleeping in the same bed. And, there was a University of Washington study where they took a couple, and when they shined a light in the eye of one, the ocular receptors in the brain of the other lit up. Like we're so entwined that what happens is as you raise and hold a certain frequency, your partner literally entrains to you automatically. And so it's like a Jedi mind trick for your relationship. It is crazy. And so often in our love relationships where our partner isn't showing up the way we want, the relationship will just naturally disintegrate. It will no longer feel so scary and painful because now you are living in a different place. You are stronger. You've done all this healing. So the fears that kept you in that relationship fall away. And now you're in choice in your relationship. And that is everything. Because if you're not in choice, you can't ever get your needs met. If you're not going to be okay and whole, not that you wouldn't be devastated if that relationship ended and maybe curl up in a ball for a while and be scared, but fundamentally you'll be okay. And that your happiness and your peace and your joy and the ways you want to feel is sourced in your relationship with yourself. And anytime we're having a relationship with someone else, we really are only having a relationship with ourselves through that other person anyway, right? When you recognize all of that and you can create your own happiness, right? I want to be with you. It's a choice. And if I can't get my needs met, I can leave.
Ooh, that was so powerful. Okay, there's a couple of things that you just said that I really want to go into. I'm a bit of a skeptic. But everything you just said makes so much sense to me. And the reason why, again, it's one of these, like, I personally can't even explain it, and you do such a great job. But like when you're around, let's say 5 of your friends and you're with each other all the time, the fact that your hormones sync up and your periods sync up, like I wouldn't have believed it. And so understanding how you become on the same frequency as your partner, like actually you laid it out so beautifully. And then there was the other piece that I thought, when you start stepping into that, I think you start acting differently as well, right? So you start setting boundaries that maybe once upon a time you didn't.
Absolutely. Any boundary you don't set is out of fear. Fear of consequences, fear of abandonment, fear of judgment. And we're not even always conscious of those fears, right? But yeah, absolutely. Everything changes for the better. So whatever happens in the relationship, your whole life is going to get better. But here's, when I wrote this book, I wrote it with my husband in mind, who I jokingly call Senor Root Chakra, because he is so pragmatic and such a skeptic. So like I have a whole chapter in there that is just laying out the science. But, and I don't mind skeptics. I was a skeptic before I really understood this too. But here's the fundamental truth that we know for a fact. We are taking in 40 billion bits of information into our brains every millisecond. But we are only consciously processing 2,000 bits. Of the 40 billion bits of information we're taking in.
So we just then taking in the things that are familiar to us?
Well, the way our conscious brain works, it's called an envelope mechanism. We can only understand things and make sense of things based on our memories.
Right.
So that's all we can process consciously.
Right.
And we're also limited by our 5 senses, right? But there's a whole universe happening around us and in us and between us that we have no clue about. because we're limited by our conscious minds and our five senses.
Yeah. Wow. That's so true. I love that. I mean, it's funny how you we're limited by it. You're right. And isn't it though, I think women have is it a fourth or a fifth color receptor that most men don't?
And we also have more connection between our left and right hemispheres. We have a lot of interaction there. So that's why women can be multitasking. We're a lot more intuitive. We're more capable of those more psychic, sixth sense understandings than many men are. Not that men aren't, but we just have that natural ability.
All right, so let's talk about the difference between genders. I know it's a little of a bit of a muddly situation, discussion right now, but I really want to talk about it because I do think there's a fundamental difference between at least me and my husband. I'm just going to say that. Me and my husband, there's a massive fundamental difference between us. And the thing that we say a lot, and I've heard you say, and I'd really love to just have a really beautiful, honest conversation about it. Women want to feel loved to have sex. Men want sex to feel loved.
Yes.
It is one of the most controversial things me and my husband have ever spoken about. And so I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, and I don't, it's partly in men's DNA and how they evolved, during caveman times, and the desire to spread your seed and all of those, DNA type impulses, right? It's also because of the way they've been socialized and everything else. So for women, we feel emotional closeness, emotional intimacy through sharing, connecting, spending time together. For some of us, cuddling, physical affection, right? But men achieve that same sense of emotional closeness. Primarily, their primary vehicle is through the physical act of sex. So what happens is, and this is what I did national research years ago on what the most sexually satisfied women have in common.
Ooh.
And the cool part and interesting part to me is that it wasn't how many orgasms they had or anything else about the technique of the partner. It was the emotional closeness they felt to the person they just had sex with that most predicted for their sexual satisfaction, above and beyond anything else. And it is also the thing that inspires women, especially in a long-term relationship after you get through that infatuation stage, right? When you move into what scientists call the attachment phase. Your desire to be sexual, the myth is that it comes from spontaneous horniness, like it did in the beginning of the relationship. Most women in a long-term relationship, for many different reasons we can get into, don't have a ton, they do have it, but they don't have a ton of spontaneous horniness. They are inspired and they don't know to access this, but they are inspired to be sexual from a feeling of I want to connect with you. I love you. I feel connected to you. I want to show you my love in a way that lands. I want to even merge closer to you. I want to feel held by you. I want you inside, whatever that is. But it's coming from a sense of connection at its core. And so what happens is once a woman loses interest in sex because she's not spontaneously horny, and she's busy and she's distracted and she just doesn't have that natural impulse to be sexual, and that's not what makes her feel connected to her partner anyway, she's less available for sex. And then he, because he's not having sex with her, doesn't feel that emotional connection and closeness. So he unconsciously, it's not like he's intending to punish her. He unconsciously pulls back. He's less likely to be romantic and send those sweet texts and cuddle and reach out to her in those emotional ways that make her feel close to him. And then because she doesn't feel close to him, she's that much less inspired to be sexual with him. So that's the sex romance stalemate, right? She's not having sex with him. He's less romantic and connected. He's less romantic and connected. She doesn't want to have sex with him. And so on and so forth.
You just explained it so perfectly because that's the thing. It's like we had an interview. It was with Sting, and someone said like, "What's the magic to your relationship?" And he said something like, "Well, I have sex for 12 hours." Now, what he actually meant, and then that rumor went around. Oh my God, he does this tantric sex for 12 hours. He's like, guys, I don't actually have sex for 12 hours, but my sex with my wife starts in the morning when I kiss her good morning. It's when I tell her at 10 a.m. that she looks beautiful. It's at 11 when I make her a hot tea. You know, he's like, that's what the sex is for my wife. She needs the 12 hours so that we can get to the last, 30 minutes or whatever.
That's what I always say. Women are like a slow burning stove. Men are like a microwave oven, you know? And so you got to stoke the flames all the time so that she's feeling that connection and foreplay. I mean, there was several studies done, which makes total sense to me, that men who do housework in a couple get significantly more sex than men who don't. And that's really for two reasons. First, because he's taking stuff off her plate that she gets too stressed about and then doesn't want to have sex because she's got to clean. But also, more importantly, that's a form of love because he's showing her that he's invested in the nest and he wants to help and he's taking things off her plate and she feels cared for and seen and partnered with and allied with and close to him and then wants to have sex with him.
Oh, that's so beautiful because it's beautiful to the way you've broken it down because, we've really spoken in this interview. It's like when you first meet someone, what are the tips and the how do we set each other up for success in order to have a long-term relationship? And then I think about long-term relationships. And when I was younger, I would see couples that had been married for a long time. And I would hear women that would say, he's not romantic, basically would spend an hour moaning and complaining about what their partner isn't doing. And then in that same breath, they're like, yeah, and it's his birthday today, so I've got to give it up. And like as a kid, I remember, not as a kid, but as a kid, I remember thinking like, that feels counterintuitive. It's saying that you want something from them, but yet at the same time, you're passing judgment on what they want.
Yes.
And so that never sat well with me. And then as I got older and I started to do these interviews and talking with you, it's like there's a big gap between like how when you first meet someone, there's this immense infatuation. And like you were saying at the beginning, like the butterflies, and oh my God, this was meant to be. I've known them my whole life. And then you flash forward 10, 15 years and you end up in this situation. And where along the lines are those traps in relationships that we fall into? And so the way that you broke it down is beautiful because I used to hear women judge men. Or their partners on wanting to be intimate.
Yeah, and that breaks my heart because I try to explain to women that he's not trying to punish you. She'll say to him, why aren't you romantic anymore? Well, if he's at all aware, he might say, well, we haven't had sex in 6 months or 3 months. And then she says, you're only going to be nice to me if she doesn't understand that her not being sexually available for a man who has a healthy libido is like him being unwilling to ask you about your day or hold your hand. Like that's what it feels like. The level of rejection and disconnect. And it's big. It's really big. And I don't think women, and the other thing that I think puts us in this position as women is that most of us were never allowed by society or our families or encouraged to develop our own relationship with our sexuality. So sex from the very beginning was transactional, which it's not supposed to be. So sex was a way to get the guy, a way to keep them, a way to get a ring on it, a way to have a baby, a way to keep them from going over there, a way to get them to be nice to me. The honey-do list, right? Like he'll do the honey-do list once I have sex. It's a transaction. But they don't have their own relationship with their own bodies and their own sexuality for its own sake, which men do, which is why they need it and want it, and also all those other DNA reasons. But women don't. So a lot of the healing that needs to happen I find with women stuck in this sex romance stalemate, is obviously there's the medical things, hormones, medications, things that inhibit your response and your libido that I never want to ignore, and relationship dynamics. But a huge part of it is your own relationship with your sexuality for its own sake. Because once you have that, then there's much more connection, right? I remember this rabbi telling this joke that if you put a jelly bean in a jar for every time you have sex before you get married, and you take one out for every time you have sex after you get married, you're going to end up with a big jar of jelly beans at the end. Right? And the reason for that is...
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
That's why men complain. Once you put a ring on a dude, you won't get laid ever. The reason for that is because you have married someone, like 99% of women in this country, for whom sex is unconsciously transactional.
Oh, wow, God, that really hit me hard. Like, because I hear you, like a currency, right? You're kind of using it as a way to get what you want.
Yes.
And so are you saying by examining yourself, by examining like what you actually like, it now no longer becomes a, well, what am I going to get from it? It's just like, this freaking feels amazing.
This is the most sacred, amazing gift that we are given our sexuality. And the connection that creates in your relationship is indescribable and irreplaceable. But even separate from your relationship, the relationship it gives you with your body, what it does to your body, the health benefits of it. And by the way, it's the highest frequency experience. It's major mass manifesting energy. It's that orgasm is that bliss energy that most of us don't spend a lot of time in unless we're Dalai Lama up on a mountaintop, right? So that's an opportunity to really experience physical bliss.
So how do you start to unwind that past? Because to your point, I mean, I was told the same. It's like, it wasn't that it was bad or I was going to, go to hell. Like, it was never that intense, which I know some people do hear that. But for me, it was never discussed. It was never a topic. It was never encouraged.
Right. Which is a message in itself.
Yeah.
Silence is a message.
Right. So how do you now, assuming that most people listening are hopefully adults, how would you suggest someone that is like listening to start exploring their body, because to your point, I think you said, is it 30% of couples end up with bed death?
Yeah, more than that. I would say that there is a stat that at least 40% of couples this is just the couples that report it, have sexless marriages.
Yeah.
And even those relationships where women are having sex, they often aren't that into it. They're doing it just to kind of maintain things. They're kind of either faking orgasms. So, I can't tell you how many men have told me that she's like, I've even heard stories where men have told me, and their partner's sitting right there and she admits it, that she says, wake me up when it's over, or don't leave me in the wet spot, or just like get it over with. Oh. So it's like this physical release that he just needs to do. And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's because she doesn't have her own relationship with herself. So the way I think every woman, and I gave you a little toy before, so you can practice it.
Honestly, come on now. Do I not have the best freaking job ever? She comes with sex toys. This is like literally the best job ever.
But that's the thing. You have to practice. You have to really get into the experience through self-stimulation and self-reverence and self-exploration of really claiming your own sexual experience for, by, and with yourself. And what happens for a lot of women is that they learn a lot during that time about how they like to be touched and don't like to be touched, and what feels good and what doesn't feel good and whatever else. But for many women who may already know that, but still have had this transactional connection, which I would say is almost all women, they going through the process of really having sex with yourself in a loving, reverent way for no purpose other than pleasure and self-connection. It's like a skill set and a capacity that is inside all of us that just needs to be awakened.
I 1,000% agree. Is there like that first... There's someone that sees it as shame, or sees it as like, I wouldn't do that, or, almost like dismisses it. Because what you're saying is so freaking powerful that I'm thinking about the person that doesn't quite believe it yet, or really wants to, but it has so many years tied up of, you shouldn't.
Don't touch yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I mean, first of all, if you don't love your genitals, how can you expect anyone else to? Like, seriously. I'm telling you. Self-stimulation is the key to your pleasure. It's the key to your power. It's the key to your sexual power. It's the key to your ability to get aroused. And it's the key to your libido. Because, first of all, where attention goes, energy flows. And if you don't use it, you lose it. You really do. Physically, you got to keep the plumbing clean. You got to keep the blood flow going. So if you're, even if you aren't having sex with your partner for some reason, if you can continually self-stimulate, it's so good for your health. It's so good for your immune system, for your blood pressure, for depression, for migraines, for your immune system. And there's so many benefits to sexual pleasure with a partner or without.
That was like the best ad for masturbation. And thank you for saying that. And the reason why I really want to talk about this, like, I used to be the one I wouldn't even say the word sex. That's how bashful I was. So I need people to know that who they see today and being able to talk about it has, because I've gone through my own evolution. And I was the one that was told it's for the guy, right? So when my first boyfriend, who I, lost my virginity to, it was for him. I didn't freaking enjoy it at all until I met my husband.
Right.
And it was because I felt safe. He encouraged me. He
was patient.
He was patient. He welcomed it. And so like all these things, I didn't feel the pressure. I felt like the idea and the notion of I'd be judged for it. He kind of like really did help break that down. And then just in that evolution allowed us to be very honest with each other. And I think that that's a big part. You actually said the mismatched libidos. How many people don't even talk about the fact that they're mismatched?
No, they don't talk about it. And then he, the one with the higher libido, men often, especially nowadays, are struggling with low libido. I think about 1 in 5 men have low libido, but it's usually the female. And, if you think about it, our bodies still haven't caught up, evolved with modern technology. Our bodies haven't, we're not supposed to live past our reproductive years. Several hundred years ago, that's what we died, 50 was like the equivalent of 85 today, right? So to live half of our lives beyond our hormonal ideal, right? A woman who's in her 20s has twice the testosterone that a woman in her 60s has, that hormone of desire and sexual response. So it's slowly declining, and we're living such a long time. So the even the physiologic underpinnings of a healthy libido starts to disintegrate as we get older. And so, that's a whole other conversation about hormone therapy that like I say, I'm not an MD, but the thing to remember is that when we're young, for many of us, sex is easy. When we're in a new relationship, for many of us, sex is easy. It's about sourcing your sexual desire from your own relationship with your sexuality and expressing that, and from a desire to express closeness, connection, and love with your partner. And what I hear from women all the time who have low libido is like, yeah, I would rather be watching Bridgerton. I'd rather be doing more things on my to-do list. But once I do it, I think, hey, this was fun. I should do this more often. But I just don't, right?
So what is that then? That little thing so once it's kind of like going to a party where you're like, I really can't be bothered to go. And then you go and you actually have fun.
Right.
But the next time you really don't want to get dressed again to go to the party.
Yes. Or go to the gym, right? But it's a habit and it's a practice.
Okay.
And it's also about the rewards it reaps. And then it kind of sex begets more sex. I find that once couples start, and it often, I'm a huge fan, even though it doesn't match the Hollywood movie depiction of sexual relationships, I am a huge fan of scheduling sex. Huge. Because it takes all the guesswork out. Because what happens when you're not having sex is the one that still wants it is scared to kiss or cuddle you because you might think they're trying to start something and they don't want to be rejected, or you won't reach out to them. Like there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room with you, right? Yes. So if you know that on Saturday, it can be different times every week or the same, every couple's different. That's when we're going to have sex. Then there's all this openness and freedom to connect and to play and to be affectionate and to stoke that stove, right? And then you're prepared for it.
I love that so much.
And then you're ready and you have sex. And then you're like, hey, this was fun. And then it creates less guesswork. The 800-pound gorilla can leave the room. And then there's so much more freedom. And the other thing I like couples to do in between their sex dates is to make sure that they spend, at least an hour, it can be split up a week, kissing, cuddling, no sex, kissing, cuddling, talking without technology, and not about the logistics of their lives. And most couples don't talk they talk maximum 15 minutes a week about things other than the logistics of their lives. And that's, they'll talk a lot about the logistics, but 15 minutes max. And they're not spending time together because they're sitting next to each other with their technology. So, and they're not kissing and cuddling and being affectionate because one of them doesn't want sex and it's all awkward. So once you kind of create this, what I find happens, especially because women, including those women with low desire, they really miss that non-sexual physical affection. They love making out, they love cuddling, but they won't initiate it because they don't want him to get too excited because they don't want to have sex. But once sex is off the table, except that time, then there's all this freedom to get all into it and have fun. And boy, is your stove stoked.
God, it's so true. Everything you just said, I was like, oh my God, it's the things that we don't really talk about. It's the things that we kind of ignore. Me and my husband, absolutely, we don't call it like a sex date, but we absolutely schedule dates. And that's the only time that we can both switch off. And then of 99.999% of the time, it ends in sex. So we do know that. And then we've started to as well spend the morning of our date getting ready for sex. So it's kind of like, sometimes, you know, it's like I'll trim his like chest hair.
Or you'll shave your legs.
And so, but we do it together. And he'll even come and just keep me company if I'm shaving my legs. Because now it feels like we're actually spending time together, and it's foreplay, And then the other thing that me and my husband do, we have a rule. I'll never, ever, ever make him feel guilty for asking for sex. And he can never, ever, ever make me feel guilty for saying no. And those are just like, and it became like this beautiful, like,
that's
the weight
so
is
much
lifted.
pressure off.
Because to your point, where the woman's like, I just want to cuddle, but I'm so freaking scared that if I cuddle him, he's gonna be turned on.
And then you have to be able, and with the sex dates, it also has to be okay to say no. Like, let's say you're really not feeling well, but you really don't want, like, that's the last resort. And if you do say no on a sex date, you are responsible for rescheduling it as quickly as possible. You know, you don't wait another week, and you get it in there, because at a bare minimum, what I want to see healthy couples is at least once a week, and ideally never going more than a few weeks with that deep physical connection.
Dr. Laura Berman, I could talk to you forever. This was so... If you want to learn the 3 boundaries that every single woman must set in a relationship, then click here right now.
Other people don't need to understand or agree with your boundary in order to respect it. She may make you try to feel bad for setting the boundary.